Hey everybody, I am back. I decided to do a second stream today. There is a lot to talk about in the world of meta ethics. So I haven't done a bonus stream on the weekend before. So hopefully people show up. I don't see anybody here yet. So, well, people are starting to show up. So hi everybody that was not expecting this. This is just unplanned. I feel like talking more about meta ethics. I kind of just was, I don't know, not up for it as much yesterday. So today I'm going to follow up on some extra stuff this week. And we've got Jonathan Becker. Hey, are you able to stick around today? I know you're always saying, hey, I'll listen to this later. I do appreciate people saying that. It makes you feel like people are really listening. You know, you get viewers, but most people, don't comment or add anything. Um, so, but of course, people they have no obligation to do that, but it's cool when people do. So today I'm going to be talking about a few things. A lot of it is stuff that I've opted to blog about more recently. So yeah, let's just get right into it. Hello, also Cloud of Time. Welcome. I don't recognize the name, so I don't know if you've been here, on my channel before. But yeah, so this is a channel about meta ethics, moral psychology, metaphilosophy. I say a lot of critical things about moral realism. That's kind of my thing. Uh, Hello, Growing Pains. And let me tell people on Discord that I am here as well. And then we will get started. One second. Oi, I gotta be quicker about doing this. Give me one moment and then I'll be able to get started. I just want to bring people over from Discord that are probably not aware that I'm doing this right now. Okay, let's get started. So the most recent thing, I guess I'll work in backwards order, that I'll comment on is a recent blog post from Mike Humor. And you could check that out. In fact, I'll just post that here. So I'll post that in the comments. And it's a pretty nice blog post. I have lots of critical things to say about what Humor says about moral realism, but I don't have a huge problem with Humor's epistemic framework when it is articulated in its sort of just general form. So what you'll see in this particular blog post is that Humor talks about this difference between agent-centered and more agent-neutral epistemic norms. And so the basic idea here is, okay, if I'm going about the world and I'm making judgments about things, I tend to typically put greater epistemic weight on my intuitions or perceptions or judgments. Like basically, I put more weight on how I think about things than about how other people think about things, at least at a sort of foundational level. And I will defer to or sort of override how things seem to me or what my judgments are in particular sorts of cases where I have good reason to think that another person's judgments are going to be better than mine. So if I go to the doctor and they say, hey, we've looked at this chart and the chart indicates you have this problem and you need to take this medication. I'm not a doctor. I don't have the training for that. And so I'm likely to defer to them in that particular case. But when it comes to basic philosophical issues, who am I going to defer to? I'm probably going to lean more heavily on myself. And so what Humor ultimately argues is that while at a sort of foundational level, we ought to adopt and employ more agent-centered norms when going about engaging in our epistemic practices, there is a sense in which in practice, we should largely gravitate towards more agent-neutral epistemic practices that don't put greater weight on our own practices. But that is, it's sort of, this isn't how Humor puts it, but that's sort of downstream of the fact that more foundationally, ultimately, it comes back to our own sort of, we are our own sort of epistemic font. And ultimately, to the extent that we defer to others or adopt these agent neutral practices, they are in a certain sense sort of second order to and a derivative of what is more foundationally a more agent centered approach. I don't have a huge problem with that. I know some people really don't like phenomenal conservatism, or they don't like saying that we should treat our intuitions or seemings as having evidential weight. I am sympathetic to those concerns. I often, will say, it's not really my focus when people critique humor for that sort of view. And then I've said, okay, well, what are your concerns with that? And then people raise concerns. And then, when I hear people out, I often go, yeah, those are good concerns. But that's not the axe I want to grind, I guess you could say. And my concern doesn't stem from sort of philosophy on paper, but really what I see people doing in practice. And what I've seen people do in practice a lot is, and this is sometimes professional philosophers, but often it's just online debates. Like, I'm on Discord, I'm in the YouTube comments, I talk on Facebook. There's places all over the internet where people interact with one another and they argue about stuff. And people vary in how much they're sort of using or doing philosophy. And you have everybody from philosophy professors like Humer himself, all the way through people that have little or no formal training in philosophy at all and don't really know the terminology, but they want to get involved in the debates. Now, for me, I think that that's super important for everybody to get involved in these discussions, because I don't think it's a good thing for philosophers. Maybe that's something we'll talk about today as well. Basically, I think philosophers sort of partition themselves off from the rest of the world. They don't interact a whole lot with non-philosophers in a way where they really, it's not that philosophers don't talk to non-philosophers, because they typically teach courses and they interact with students, but that's often in a pedagogical sense where there's a dynamic where they are teaching the students how they do what they do. And it's not an instance where everybody's sort of battling it out. And if you view, and I'm not saying this is the best or the most healthy or the optimal or the exclusive way to think about philosophy, but if you think of certain types of philosophical exchanges as a type of intellectual combat, like you step into the ring, right? My concern is that if philosophers only cultivate a sense in which they only step into the ring with other philosophers and they rarely get serious about stepping into the ring with non-philosophers, that they develop I'll just run with the metaphor, a fighting style that is never tested. It's never of innovations and ways of approaching fights might emerge from outside the academic context. And with that greater insularity, there can become a stagnation and a deterioration in the ability for philosophers to respond to in an effective way how non-philosophers think about issues. So you end up, just imagine a group of people, like there's a fight club and they only fight each other and they only fight each other and they only fight each other. Over time, all of the moves that they'll end up using will be moves optimized for winning against one another and not for winning against anybody else. And that can become, in certain cases, pathological. It could be detrimental, because there can be a deterioration in the quality and breadth and scope of how people in that small fight club fight with one another, until they end up developing a style of fighting that really isn't very suited for most real world combat. And so then they step into the world arena and they try to fight people and they're not very good at it and they lose. So part of my concern is that philosophers, that their insularity is rendering them increasingly incapable of adequately engaging with people outside of their respective academic disciplines. Now, how does this tie into Humer's whole point about, hey, fundamentally, we rely on these agent-centered approaches? Well, it ties into it in the sense that to the extent that philosophers employ these more agent-centered approaches, if simultaneously they are more rationalist rather than empiricist in their philosophical approach, and they tend not to engage with people outside of academic circles, then you have people that you have this situation where, hey, I get to put greater epistemic weight on how I think than how anybody else thinks. I should defer to other people, but only if they're experts. Okay, but the only people I'm going to defer to are my colleagues, and all of my colleagues only talk with each other and not really with anybody else. So what you get is a kind of a bunch of people that are isolated and are not interacting with everybody else, and then they end up speaking and thinking in ways that are super separated off from the rest of the world. It's a kind of I could describe it in ways that sound really unflattering, but basically there you can get this narrow blinkered way of thinking where you're just not engaging with a wider range of possible thoughts. And this can generate groupthink, create a sort of methodological it could an epistemic echo chamber where your views aren't challenged by people. And then when people do challenge your views, you're like, look, why don't you shut up? Because we're the experts and you're not an expert. And that there's a sort of really unhealthy combination of siloing the discipline of academic philosophy, everybody in the field mutually patting one another on the back and saying you're all experts, and then saying everybody outside is not experts. And then you don't talk to any of those people. You develop your own ways of thinking that are really cordoned off from everybody else. Those ways of thinking aren't tested in the sort of court of public debate. They stagnate, they get weaker, they get increasingly obscure and strange, and you don't handle objections from the outside. And then when you finally are sort of dragged into that public dispute, you say, I'm the expert, not you, so shut up and defer to me. I don't think other people are going to do it. I think they're going to say, what have you done for society lately? You know, doctors are curing diseases, engineers are building bridges and working on all sorts of technologies that improve our lives. What are you doing? You're arguing with each other. It's just a bunch of people yelling at each other with using weird terminology that most people don't understand and don't care about. And oftentimes when you explain the terminology, people go, huh, and really, that's it? You know, so it's not like when you explain a bunch of philosophy to the public, people typically react with, whoa, they're kind of like, really? You're arguing about whether tables exist and it comes down to this stupid verbal nonsense. Ugh. So all you get is eye rolling. It's kind of absurd, and I'm not a fan of it. Anyway, my concern is that this sort of combination that has to do really with the sort of sociology of philosophy as a discipline, that coupled with the sorts of points that humor makes, that while humor's points, because humor's like, look, because in fact, I'll just show you the precise passage where humor is very clear in saying something that I think is completely modest and reasonable, and there's nothing I think that's obviously transparently wrong with what's being said. It's this. I'll post it here. This is what humor says here. I really should put quotes around that. In fact, yeah, I'm going to do that. I don't like having this here and making it seem like I'm saying it. One second. All right. There we go. Much better. Humor says this. My claim, the correct view is agent-centered at the fundamental level. However, in practice, people should mostly act very similarly to an agent neutralist. That seems completely reasonable to me. And I think it is pretty reasonable. Maybe someone has good objections to it. My concern is that if you're constantly drawing attention to the centeredness of one's justifications, what this can do in practice is license a type of really, really subtle motivated reasoning. And this is facilitated through what I call epistemic blank checks. And here's how that works. Let's say you go about your business in a roughly agent-centered at the fundamental level, but in practice, largely deferential to agent neutrality approach, right? Now, here's how that works. So I go around, I have all my seemings, right? The world seems a certain way to me. In any given situation, I have some initial impression or judgment or intuition. In some cases, I'm 50-50. But in other cases, I'm leaning this way. In other cases, I'm super confident of this rather than that, and so on, right? So I'm super confident there's trees outside. I'm less confident whether there was or was not life on Mars. I'm even less confident that, the moon doesn't exist, something like that. I'm pretty sure, then I'm very certain it does exist. And so I'm confident of the reverse. So you have the whole gamut of you're very certain something's the case, you're very uncertain it's the case. Your confidence can move all around, right? But that's all based on your sort of personal judgments. And then you start listening to what other people have to say about these sorts of things. And presumably, on humor's view, there's a significant extent that is going to vary by context. And the kinds of contextual factors that matter are how many people hold a contrary view, how strongly they hold a contrary view, why they hold the contrary view, who they are, what their own epistemic track record is. Like if you are making judgments about I don't know, who's going to win a particular game or how a particular event is going to go. And your friend's like, it's going to go the other way. And then you're like, no, I really feel like it's going to go the way I think. And then they say, hold up, let's actually go through this. How accurate have you been? And let's say your past 50 predictions, you were wrong 100% of the time. And then they were right 100% of the time. You should probably go, okay, they're probably right, right? And so depending on a bunch of background factors that vary from issue to issue and person to person and all these sorts of contextual cues, you will adjust your confidence in accordance with the judgments of others. There's a certain degree of assigning weight to what other people think. You don't assign no weight. So in practice, there's a degree to which agent neutrality does function as a useful feature for updating your beliefs in a way that is likely to make them more accurate, right? That's reasonable. Now, the problem is that if fundamentally it comes down to one's seemings or what seems true to you, here's what can happen. Unconsciously, people that are adopting this explicit, yeah, I'm agent-centered fundamentally, but agent neutral in practice approach, is that this can give the appearance that they are engaging in a modest, reasonable epistemic practice. But what it could actually be going on is that any central core beliefs, because they can always, basically they have sort of permanent, unassailable, and total veto power over any agent neutral considerations. So the way that this would work in practice is that I start with my beliefs. You can present evidence to the contrary in the form of other people's beliefs or defeaters of my seemings or anything that could override my beliefs. And then, because my epistemic practices prioritize an agent-centered and phenomenally conservative approach, and there doesn't, at least as far as I could tell, there doesn't seem to be any principled way of quantifying the evidential weight of those seemings or the weight to which I can prioritize the agent-centered epistemic considerations relative to agent-neutral epistemic considerations. In any instance in which my beliefs are really on the line, motivated reasoning can kick in, provide that additional epistemic fudge factor, and push you over the threshold into vetoing any belief that would really run contrary to your own beliefs. Now, people could even be so unconsciously clever, you could say, is that they can strategically sacrifice some of their less, like more tangential beliefs, like beliefs at the periphery of their core belief system, to preserve the beliefs in the center while maintaining both to their own satisfaction. Since, hey, I've changed my beliefs before. I've given up beliefs before. Look, I changed this belief. The experts say this, so I accept what the experts have to say. No problem. See, I'm being epistemically virtuous, when really it's like sacrificing a pawn in order to take your opponent's queen, right? It's really that you're giving up the beliefs that aren't at the center in order to preserve the beliefs that are. And so long as you have that agent-centeredness, as long as you have those seemings, well, how strong is your seeming? If your seeming is 1 point in favor, and then you have to accord, and there's agent-neutral way of assigning points to all the potential defeaters and all the judgments that other people have, that point gets overshadowed very quickly by the arguments against your view, and then any additional arguments you bring to bear in favor of your view. So you step onto the stage to argue for your view. 1 point in favor of your view because it seems to be true to you. And these points are not with respect to what other people have to accord, because you're being agent-centered here fundamentally. This is what you are justified in believing, right? So you start the discussion with not who is correct, but what am I justified in believing when I walk away from this board? Think of it sort of metaphorically in my head as a chessboard, right? So I step out of the chessboard. I got 1 point in my favor of my view because it seems true to me. And again, it's a point of justification, not a point that's publicly available. It's just what I'm allowed to believe when I leave. Okay, so I got my 1 point. You come along and you present defeaters, right? You take some of my pieces. And so that's, say, 10 points. Okay, am I stuck with the 1 point? Well, no, now that's 9 points total. Like I have negative 9 points. I got to give up my belief. I'm not justified anymore. But I could present attacks of my own. I could critique your views. I could raise additional publicly available considerations in favor of my view. In case that all sounds metaphorical, imagine an actual case for how someone might argue for, naturally, moral realism. So they start by saying, hey, it seems that moral realism is true to me. Or they might say something like, it seems to me that torturing babies for fun is wrong in a way that would only be true if realism is true. And so I get to start this discussion with a point in favor of realism. And then the other person comes along and they say, well, I've got evolutionary debugging arguments and Mackey's arguments and this argument and that argument, whatever it would be from the anti-realist, and you grant, okay, fine, 10 points against my view. But I have like the argument for moral convergence, and that's 15 points in favor of my view, or maybe that's only 5 points. And I have to bring another argument, companions and guilt. And when you really think about companions guilt, that's another 10 points. So ultimately I come out with the 10 from companions guilt, 5 from convergence, and 1 for my seeming, and I get 16 points against your 10. I win. I am justified in believing in moral realism. That is how this is supposed to work. It's how it's supposed to. And I don't think humor is advocating like a view where it wouldn't work this way. This should be how it works, I think. But in practice, is your seeming 1 point? It's not at all clear. In practice, what I think people actually do, and you'll see this when people make the Morean shift, is they'll say something like this. Hey, any argument for moral anti-realism is going to have premises that are less plausible than realism. And so I just get to, so if that's true, think about, because people will literally say stuff like that. I've heard it repeated numerous times. I've heard William Lane Craig repeat it. I've heard other people repeat it to me. I think sometimes they're quoting specific people that have said this. I don't have the quotes on hand. If you have them, feel free to share them in the chat. I think I've seen the quotes before, but I can't remember who exactly said this. And I don't know if they were quoting somebody else. I've heard this so many times, it's got to go back somewhere. Maybe it goes back to Moore. I don't know. So the problem is that when you make that Morean shift, where you say arguments against moral realism are less plausible than moral realism, and I've heard people say any arguments, and things like, well, I don't know if people have said any possible argument, but people have said any argument against realism is less plausible than realism. Really, any argument. So you've heard all the arguments, all the possible arguments. Like, what exactly do they mean by that? Do they mean all the ones they've heard so far, or all the ones that could be heard in principle? What exactly are they talking about? So yeah, if you're going to dismiss the arguments in advance, and I think that's what people are doing, they're basically saying, look, if your conclusion is anti-realism, I can always say there's got to be at least one premise there that's going to be more ridiculous than realism. And so I don't even have to consider your premises. I just get to reject it. That's how we're going to do philosophy backwards. We're going to pick our conclusions and then judge premises, the truth or falsehood of premises on the basis of whether we like the conclusion. Is that what we're going to do? And then say that's principled? Because that's what the Morean move looks like to me. It looks like choosing your conclusions and then evaluating the premises in light of what conclusions you've already accepted. And then it looks like philosophers will, in a seemingly principled way, anoint that as an appropriate epistemic procedure. But then they'll also say all this stuff about well, it's just phenomenal conservatism. I'm just saying it seems true in the absence of defeaters. If you give me defeaters, I'll change my mind. But also, I'm a Morean about this. Well, if you're a Morean about it, how are you going to change your mind exactly? So I think something psychologically suspicious is going on here. And there's something off about how philosophers operate in practice when they both endorse phenomenal conservatism and they have these seemings that for which, keep in mind, the seemings are privately, they're private, they're inaccessible to the public. And so if we're not talking about publicly available evidence, we're talking about how things seem to you. Notice what people are doing when they make the Morean move. It doesn't matter what evidential weight the defeaters represent. The seeming could, in principle, constitute greater evidential weight against whatever those defeaters would favor. So, for instance, it's not like I step onto the chessboard and I got 1 point in favor of my seeming, and then you present your 10 points and I go, okay, well, unless I've got some good arguments against your view or in favor of my view, I'm not justified in having the view. Instead, if someone shows up with their 10 points against your view, you could just say, 10, that's it, 10 points. You don't understand how strong my seeming is. And if they go, okay, well, fine, hold up a minute. And then they go and they study their chess moves and they do all their, this of course is a metaphor for doing philosophy. And they come back and they're like, watch this. And they make a bunch of cool moves. They change their opener. They remember to not sacrifice pieces unnecessarily and not be too aggressive and not push their pawns in weird ways where they're messing things up for themselves. Whatever. I don't know enough chess. They do all that. And then they're like, I've got 100 points of defeaters here. Then you could always respond by saying, yeah, not enough. My seemings are stronger than that. And the thing is, there's two issues. One is I haven't seen any principal grounds for knowing how much how do you weigh how strong your seemings are against defeaters? No one's you just consult your seemings. So it's some inscrutable thing. I mean, it honestly looks like a power level in Dragon Ball Z or something, where you're just like, it's 9,000, and then it just beats anything. So someone shows up and they do all their moves, and you're like, you don't understand. My power level is like 8 million. So forget it. You can't even touch me. And then you just, do a Kamehameha and you blast them away, and then they're done. I mean, it's what are people supposed to do in response to this? So this is what philosophers do in practice. They just assign arbitrarily greater weight to how things seem to them than any arguments to the contrary. Here's the second thing about that. There is no way to test this. So let's say you're having a discussion with someone, and let's say you just grant that seemings count as evidence, right? And they can count apparently as any amount of evidence, right? Because if people are going to make a Morean shift where they say any arguments against realism are less plausible than realism, well, less plausible. Why? Because of their seemings, right? It's because of the seemings itself. So the seemings have, in principle, unlimited evidential power. And so you present your arguments against it, and they can assign whatever way. Let's say you grant that seemings can operate this way. How are you going to know whether that person is accurately reporting their seemings or not? The answer is you can't. There is no way to know. It's not accessible to you. It's private. So the example I sometimes give is, let's say you went out in the, let's say you're a cryptozoologist, or let's say you're not even a cryptozoologist, right? You're very skeptical, and you have this friend that insists they saw Bigfoot, and you're like, it's total nonsense. So you go out into the woods and you run into Bigfoot, and Bigfoot's like, listen, I am real. You're welcome to hang out with me. And you go back and you hang out with Bigfoot. You play like Mario Kart or whatever in the woods. You spend a whole week with Bigfoot. You really get to know Bigfoot. You know you're not hallucinating. You know you're not dreaming. You come back to society and you spend a whole week with Bigfoot. Is anyone going to believe you? Of course not. No one is going to believe you. Now, do you have privately accessible, like really good reasons to believe Bigfoot's totally real? Absolutely. You're in a very good position to know Bigfoot is real, but no one else is going to take that seriously. And so if someone said, but we haven't found tracks, hey, we haven't, like when people test the DNA, it's always like a bear or something. It's never actually Bigfoot. All these arguments are like good arguments. Like, if Bigfoot was real, how come we don't have a good video of Bigfoot? Why do we just have like a couple sketchy videos that kind of look like hoaxes, that probably are hoaxes, right? They could raise all these good defeaters, but you would know that none of those defeaters are as strong as how obvious it is to you that Bigfoot is real. And you would be right, right? You would be right. Now, that is how philosophers treat their seemings. They just treat it as just, I get to just have whatever. And where does this come from? Like in the case of Bigfoot, I notice my example is very empiricist, right? You encountered a being, you spent time with the being, you talked to them, you interacted with them, right? So you had lots of this sort of firsthand information. But what are philosophers consulting? They're not consulting their like memories of like finding. It's not like philosophers like, Mike Humer went out into the woods and found some moral facts and was like, oh, look at this, murder is wrong and stealing is wrong, and was holding it, and then spent a week like lovingly caressing stealing is wrong, like a little piece of it. No, this didn't happen. This is just people, accessing their minds. Just my mind can do it. Maybe it can, but when has there been any sort of again, they might just say it's not an empirical question. So philosophers are just like privately consulting their minds, and then I'm supposed to take however strong something seems to them from in their mind. That is the overriding evidence in these issues. So we have all these. What the hell is the point in any of the philosophical arguments if someone could just go, yeah, but it just seems wrong. It's just, you seem incorrect to me. Imagine if like physicists did this, right? So Einstein has general and special relativity, and there's gravitational lensing, and we should find this in space, and I make these 8 predictions, and if astronomers find them, then this is really good evidence that we need to modify our view of Newtonian physics. And then we go out and test, and all the tests come out positive, like in favor of Einstein's view. And then the physicist goes, look, I completely grant that all does serve as really good evidence that Einstein's correct, but it really seems like Newton's right to me. So any argument against Newton's views about physics is less plausible than Newtonian, justified in believing it. So this, to me, this is what I have in mind when I talk about an epistemic blank check. And I think that analytic philosophers, especially ones that are not fond of empiricism. Now, Humer has a whole blog post just saying like why empiricists are wrong, and why are they wrong? Because we just know stuff in a non-empirical way. How do we know it? Well, we just do, apparently. So that when philosophers do this, they are simply like, it's almost like, certain sorts of facts are facts that are made true by people declaring them the case. Like when people like name a ship, right? Like what do they, you smash a champagne bottle on it and you're like, I named the ship the SS, whatever name of a ship, the Lance Independent, right? I couldn't come up with a creative name, so I'm sorry. I was probably going to end up saying something really embarrassing. So, so the SS Lance Independent, right? So you name your ship. Your act of naming the ship is what it is that names the ship. And to me, it very much looks like philosophers have just said, well, I declare myself an authority on the matter, and I declare my judgments to have this epistemic weight. They haven't done anything that's publicly valuable. And what they'll often do is a sort of indirect way of arguing, hey, we are experts and we've thought about this issue a lot. And in virtue of being experts who have thought about this a lot, and in virtue of being humans, and humans generally have reliable judgments, our judgments should be treated and regarded as reliable. Okay, there are so many, like, okay, so do you want to get empirical on this stuff or not? Because if you're not making an empirical question, I don't know why I should take that seriously. Judgments in one domain don't just transfer over to other domains. Think about skill development, right? So if I get really good at chess, is that going to make me good at tennis? No. If I learn a whole lot about one language, does that make me good at speaking another language? Well, maybe if they're very related to one another, but not necessarily. Skills may give some transfer of competence or ability in another very closely related skill. But generally speaking, being good at one thing doesn't necessarily make you good at another thing. And simply because, say, visual perception tends to be pretty reliable, it does not mean that philosophical judgment is reliable. Why? Well, we have a brain. And the brain does all sorts of stuff, right? There's all sorts of cognitive faculties and mechanisms and stuff going on. And it's not like, simply because some of those mechanisms tend to be reliable in some contexts does not mean, and let's say they're super reliable in those contexts, does it follow that some other mechanism is reliable in the same context? No. And does it follow that a different mechanism is reliable? Sorry, the same mechanism is reliable in a different context? No, right? So you would have to know what is the mechanism in question and what context is it operating in, because there's going to be the reliability of any particular psychological mechanism is going to be a dynamic function of what the mechanism is, how it works, and then what sort of inputs it's, so basically what inputs it's operating on, how it processes those inputs, and that will tell you whether it's delivering you reliable outputs. In the case of, say, a philosophical intuition, like realism is true, what psychological mechanism is prompting that judgment in Hume or Enoch or other moral realists? Which mechanism? In the brain. No, nobody knows. Nobody studied this. So we don't know what it's not visual perception. They're not seeing facts. So people will talk about seeing facts metaphorically, but what mechanism are they using? We don't know. And so we don't know how reliable it is. Maybe they have dreamed up a completely bogus epistemic procedure that doesn't work at all and is completely unreliable. How the hell should we know unless we do the appropriate psychological research to find out what mechanisms are operating in the context in which philosophers are making normative judgments and metaethical judgments? If we don't know the mechanisms and the context in which they're operating, how the hell are we going to evaluate their reliability? And also, let's just say we do know which, like we do a bunch of fMRI research and EEG research and all this behavioral research. We use eye tracking stuff and we know what all this stuff, right? Let's say we do all that. How are we going to corroborate their judgments? What are we going to do exactly? There's no external method of corroboration. So what philosophers are claiming to be able to do is no more capable of being empirically confirmed than a person claiming that they are telepathically communicating with angels or something. And the angels tell me stuff in my head. How would you test that? How? The answer is you can't. There's no way to test it. And so, okay, so if this is cut off from empirical corroboration, I'm not why exactly should we take them seriously? I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm saying if we should, why? So I haven't heard a good answer to that. And philosophers simply declaring themselves experts is not persuasive to me. Okay, so that's the sort of thing I want to cover. And why do I stress this my concern about the sort of sociology of philosophy? My concern here is that the way that philosophers talk about philosophy and the way that they go about developing their epistemic really ignores human psychology. So, I mean, think about what do we reason with? Our minds, right? Like our brains do stuff, and that's the tool we use to reason. Wouldn't you think it would make sense? I mean, I see this as a rhetorical question, but wouldn't you think it would make sense if you wanted to know how to reason well, to study the tool you use to do the reasoning? In other words, study human brains, study psychology, neuroscience, cognitive science. Like, isn't that, I'm not saying just study cognitive, like just look at what is a brain doing? How do neurons work? And then we just leave it at that. No, I'm not saying we drop philosophy. I'm saying that philosophy needs to work, if we're going to do epistemology well, hand in hand with psychology and neuroscience to understand what our brains are, how they work, what, basically you got the hardware end, like the neuroscience end, and the software end, the psychology end. We need to understand the software and the hardware that we're working with, because that's what we're using. We're using a particular type of information processing device. Shouldn't we figure out how it processes information? And yet philosophers don't focus on that. They just, they talk about these principles in a way that just treats human brains as if that's just happens to be the thing we happen to use to think with, and not like it's constitutively, like there's not a way around that that's the thing that we're working with, and that much of the way that we think is going to be contingent on how our brains happen to work. But philosophers treat reasoning as if it's like substrate transcendent, and it just doesn't matter what we're using to reason. We all reason the same way, and that's just not true. It's not true. So that really frustrates me, this anti-empirical way of approaching epistemology that just basically ignores most psychology. Okay, I said a lot of stuff. Let me get into the chat and see what people said. All right. So a few people saying hi. Hey, Danny, what's up? So for those of you who didn't see, Danny and I I think it's my video with the most views, and it's only a couple weeks old, and I've had views going back 6 months. So that's really cool. Thanks, Danny, for doing that. We did a review of you may have seen it, the recent Trent Horn and Destiny debate on the morality of abortion. That was on I think it's called Whatever podcast. And so so what Danny did is sought out all these clips on meta ethics, and then we reviewed those clips together, and we both gave commentary on them. I think I probably gave way too much commentary, but too bad. I had fun with it. It was really great. It might be my first video to get to 1,000 views. If you haven't seen it, do go check it out. In fact, I am going to post it in the chat for people who have or haven't seen it. For those who have seen it, why don't you sell it to the rest of my audience right now, for those who may not have seen it? Maybe you hated it, but what did you think of it? If you liked it, then you could tell people how much you liked it. If you didn't like it, just tell them how much you liked it anyway, so I could get the views. No, honest feedback. If you actually hated it, then you should say so. But I doubt most people did. I don't know why you would hate that in particular, but like my other stuff. Anyway, let me post that. All right. It should be posted in the chat. And let me see if when that comes up, I could pin it. All right. I hope that link works. It looks a little weird. Let me make sure it's working and click on it. Yeah, it looks like it's working. Cool. Okay. And that was what, like a half hour ago. So, I've gotten better with responding to people more quickly. This time I just kind of went off because of this blog post from this morning. But let me get caught up. All right. So this was from a half hour from Cloud of Time, linguistic bridge collapse. I don't know what it's a reference to, but I love the sound of it. So unless it's something awful, in which case then I don't like it, and I don't like it at all. So tell me what it means, and then I'll decide if I like it or not. Hello, Stunning Currency, who says, why so early? Because I felt like it, and because I can. That's why. All right. Jordan H. Hello. Jordan H. says, great point. I think philosophy should strive with science to challenge each other's assumptions. 100% agree. Philosophers and scientists need to stop not talking to one another. And when they do, they need to stop all the goofy shit talk, like scientists saying really stupid things like philosophy is dead. Often, I'll criticize analytic philosophy and say it's on its way out and all this stuff. If you're going to say that stuff, at least have some semblance of some vague understanding of what you're talking about. But a lot of times the objections you see from scientists are really, really crappy. Oh, right. We've got Exalted. I don't know how to say that. Sitherode? Okay, we're going to go with that. I'll just call you Exalted. All right. So with David Enoch, Jonas Olson conceded that queerness argument for error theory is at bottom explication of unintuitiveness of objective ethics from anti-realist point of view. So I listened to that discussion. I don't remember Olson saying that. If you can find the timestamp, in fact, I've listened to it a couple times. If you could find the, maybe I just wasn't very attentive. Sorry. So according to Exalted, so this was a recent video with David Enoch and Jonas Olson. So if you don't know, Enoch is a moral realist and Olson is an error theorist. So Olson believes that moral claims purport to describe stance-independent moral facts, but those moral facts are systematically false, at least if Olson has a conventional view of what error theory is. And so Exalted is saying that Olson conceded that queerness argument for error theory is at bottom explication of the unintuitiveness of objective ethics from an anti-realist point of view. I would be really curious to see the timestamp for that, because I typically take arguments. So if you're not familiar with the argument from queerness, this is an argument put forward from J.L. Mackie, and it's typically treated as the sort of flagship argument that error theorists employ against moral realism. And very roughly, the idea is that the idea of something like an objectively prescriptive fact, like a fact that has both the properties of objectivity and the sort of normative properties that moral facts are supposed to have, that combination of properties is almost like a purple number or something like that. It's very metaphysically bizarre from that point of view to imagine that sort of thing existing. And so because it seems sort of metaphysically mysterious and dubious, on those grounds, we ought to reject it. Now, this is entirely consistent with someone finding moral realism to be, this is covering my face, I'm gonna remove it. This is entirely consistent with someone saying, hey, I think realism is intuitive. Like I start out with that intuition. And they could say like, what I mean by that is I have this inclination to think realism is true. But then when I consider how it would work in terms of metaphysics, it doesn't make sense. There's something strange about it. There's something metaphysically suspicious about it. So I reject it. I accept Mackie's argument and I endorse error theory. That's it seems consistent to be, in other words, to find realism intuitive, but to reject it on the grounds that Mackie does and be an error theorist. Now, according to this comment, Olson, who's an error theorist, as far as I know, views the argument actually as expressing an anti-realist intuition, if I'm understanding you. That would be surprising, but also an interesting possibility. So Exalted also says, well, we have to choose our starting points. Usually we don't become global skeptics because of arguments for unintuitive positions. You know, it's fine to say we have to choose our starting points, but the problem is there's a difference between having a starting point and having an incorrigible starting point. You know, it's one thing to say, I know it's one thing to say, it seems to me that phenomenal consciousness exists, but if Dan Dennett has good enough arguments, I'll stop believing in phenomenal consciousness. But I don't think that's how a lot of people hold that view. The view is, yeah, illusionism is ridiculous. Eliminativism is ridiculous. If you don't think there's phenomenal consciousness, that you are confused, or you're like really endorsing a view based on your weird, like really aggressive naturalism. And it's just too absurd to even take seriously, and I'll never take it seriously. I think a lot of people that believe in phenomenal consciousness or qualia, that is how they treat it. They're not open to changing their mind. They might not even be capable of changing their mind given their current philosophical commitments. What worries me about the way a lot of people think about philosophical issues, and this is something I'll talk to a friend, because a friend of mine had an idea, and I think they even had a name for it, and I want to run it by them to say, hey, can I talk about this in my stream? Just in case you want to write a paper on it, because it's a pretty cool idea. So bring it up after checking with them. I want to be mindful that maybe they want to write a paper on it. Okay, let's look for other comments. So Jordan H. asks, if Amorian shifts are invalid, if a philosopher arrived at solipsism in their view on epistemology, should they then adopt it? Yeah, for me, these questions are like, I see the questions as almost, not to say that there's something wrong with asking it, but let's say you take my point of view, which is a crudely, like I'm not like a pragmatist scholar, but I tend to lean towards these more pragmatist approaches to philosophy. I'm going to ask the question of, is it going to make a difference whether you're a solipsist or not with respect to how you treat other people, what you do? If so, maybe it's not a good idea to endorse solipsism. If not, I don't care. So I'm going to ask these sort of pragmatic questions about, what do you get out of the belief? What does the belief do for you? MG says some of the points you're making generalized to priors as a general matter in Bayesian epistemologies. Those criticisms have been levied by, quote, highly regarded philosophers. I don't know if there's sarcasm in there or not when the quotes are used that way. Yeah, maybe they are. Okay, well, I'm making them anyway. Them, then there's problems with them. I am totally open to, epistemology is not my area of specialization, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's huge errors or just considerations I haven't considered that would make me change my views. All right, Cloud of Time says, or sorry, yeah, Cloud of Time is asking for the Olson David Enoch debate. I don't know if it was linked subsequently, but I'll link it here because I think I know where it is. I was going to say I know where it is, and then I realized I could search for it and then not find it. No, I found it right away. Yeah, if you just put in David Enoch Jonas Olson, it should come up right away. But I will put a link in here anyway. Here it is. I'm going to get caught up on everybody, then take a break, and then move on to the next topic. Okay, it should now be pinned. Let me double check to make sure that's working. I'm goofy and I mess things up a lot. So yeah, it's there. Cool. So you can check that out. All right, and let's move on. Daniel Kelly says, I wonder if these same philosophers would take issue with the divine sense. I forgot the Latin. Isn't it sensus divinitatis? Something like that. Yeah, I've sometimes mockingly called philosophers that claim that they have like no moral realism is true because they perceive moral facts, or they just, it seems to them like a what did I call it, a sensus ethicus or sensus moralis or something like that. Yeah, if you just, and a lot of the ways that non-naturalist realists talk about moral epistemology, it really does sound like they're claiming that they have this special faculty for detecting moral facts. Okay, one, maybe they do. Two, they haven't given me what I take to be any good reason to think that they have that faculty. And often the reaction seems to be that they will just say, well, I know I have the faculty because I'm using it. Like, I see red and I see the moral facts. And if you can't see the moral facts, I'm sorry, that's your problem. No, it's not. It's your problem. I don't believe you. So you're welcome to say it's my problem, but why on their view should I take them seriously? That's what I want to know. Why should I believe them? Now, I've had some realists come down to saying, I do have people still saying stuff like, you do believe me, you do have the same phenomenology, and you do perceive the moral facts, you just don't realize it. Oh, really? Okay, so I spent, what have I been doing this for 20 years now? And I haven't noticed, sure, that's possible. Why should I believe that? Okay, maybe you've realized, I could say to them, you actually on some level realize you're wrong, and it's just motivated reasoning, and you're just coping with the fact that you don't want to have to confront the sort of nihilistic valley you'd have to cross through to get to my point of view. So you're just engaged and motivated. I could psychologize too. So they'll say that, or they'll say that I'm lying or pretending not to have these intuitions. It's ridiculous. I've written at this point now a couple blog posts where I really dig in to how ridiculous those claims are. It's at some point I am not kidding. I will bring like my wife in here if she's willing to show up, or give me like a recording or something, like testimony, right? So one of the things when people say that I'm lying, like, you're pretending not to have qualia or to not have this intuition or that intuition. You're pretending not to have realist intuitions. I talk about the stuff when I'm off camera, like nonstop. This is all like, it's to the point where I am bothered by myself by how much I talk about this stuff. I talk about it privately with my friends. I talk about it with my family. If I were pretending performatively to like not have realist intuitions, I am the biggest liar. I'm the biggest liar in the world, because like I'm off camera and I'm still doing it. Like I talk to my wife. Like I'll be like in bed and I'm like, the irreducible normativity bothers me. That might sound ridiculous. I am not kidding. It's all day long I'm bothered by this stuff. You see me on camera. This is how I am off camera. So like, unless I'm the biggest liar in the world to everyone around me all the time for no good reason for like a decade, I'm not pretending. You could say I'm totally confused and wrong about everything, but it's not like an act. So it's just so weird. I don't go around saying to people that believe in various philosophical views that they're pretending to have their view. I'm going to be honest, because before I finished up the degree and all this other stuff, I was really hesitant to be honest and blunt about this stuff. Those kind of accusations are obnoxious, they're ridiculous, and they're pathetic. People should not, you shouldn't just say, oh, you don't have my philosophical view? Yes, you do. You're lying about it because everyone has what a smug thing to say to other people. To be so confident that you're right that you literally refuse to believe someone that's telling you to your face, I don't think what you think. And I'd love to have a discussion about it. To go, you actually do, and you're just pretending not to. Really? So I'm pretending not to have realist intuitions. Why? What's the motive? And how do you know that? What kind of incredible like CIA super interrogator powers do you have that you know because you actually mean it? You know somehow. Well, with those incredible powers, why the hell are you doing philosophy? Why don't you just, there's a lot more profitable ways to make money in the world if you can detect liars like that. It's ridiculous. And it's egregious and obnoxious and incredibly annoying when people make those sorts of claims in the exchanges that I've had. And they do it, and it really gets under my skin, but I'm trying to put it behind me. And just, if someone's going to do that, I think moving forward, I'm just going to say, yeah, if you're just going to accuse people blind, there's no point in us having a conversation. Because like, if I imagine I did that to you, yeah, you're just lying about your views. Also, the other thing is, why does it matter if I'm lying about my views? Like, let's say I was lying. I could still be right anyway. Like, you still have to evaluate the arguments on their own merits. Like, if I was saying, hey, whatever, I don't need to give an example. I was going to give a stupid example. I give too many examples. People shouldn't do that either. It's lame. I don't even know what point I wanted to make. Okay. Aren't your global misgivings, this is from Exalted, aren't your global misgivings about philosophical methodology apply to your own favorite philosophical views themselves? Can they pass the test of independent corroboration? It seems they fare as well. When you say it seems they fare as well, I don't know quite what you mean by that, but I take it that you mean it seems like your views are subject to these same sorts of considerations. I don't think that they are, because I'm going to take a pragmatist view on these things. So it's all about what's going to work for people, and my views might not work for other people, and then I wouldn't hold them to those views. So I'm not playing the same epistemic game humor is in the first place. Humor is trying to achieve what to me is a obscure and mysterious sanctification for his beliefs, that those beliefs are quote unquote justified. I don't give a shit about justified beliefs. So I don't care about that. So I'm just not even playing the same philosophical game. And my metaphilosophical approach, I think, is sufficiently divergent that I don't think it's subject to these concerns. It might be subject to various concerns, but I don't think it's these ones. And like, so on my view, the kinds of issues that I would supposedly face, I just take to be non-issues from the outset. And so in a certain sense, some of what I'm proposing is in part a sort of internal or intersubjective critique where I'm saying, look, can't we both agree that there's issues that your view has given your other views that I think may or may not apply to my own views? I think they probably actually wouldn't, which is like, that's not a coincidence. That's part of the reason I favor more pragmatic approaches, is that I think the kinds of philosophical aspirations non-pragmatist philosophers have tangle them up in these knots. They're trying to get justification and all this stuff that I don't think it's not even that I think that they're incorrect. I think it's that they're not even incorrect. I think that these are largely just verbal pretzels that philosophers are working themselves into that don't get them anywhere and don't achieve anything because they don't have their eye on the same ball as me. The ball my eye is on is, how am I going to get my life to go the way that I want? How am I going to achieve my goals? How am I going to, do what I want to do? Whereas for philosophers, as long as that the ball is truth with a capital T, that is somehow outside of, not reducible to and not collapsible to sort of a pragmatic approach, I think they're never going to get there. And I think they've set for themselves a set of goals that are unachievable. And I think I said unachievable. I think I was going to say unobtainable and unachievable, and I mixed the two. Unachievable. So yeah, I think they're unachievable, which is not a word, but too bad. It's funny because it's the kind of word, in my dissertation, I actually made up a fake word that totally makes sense given the surrounding context. And then I have a footnote for it saying and I'm making a point in the text about how we use context to figure out what things mean. And then I use a word that doesn't, it's just a nonsense word I made up that totally makes sense in the context. And then the footnote is like, I bet you knew exactly what this meant, even though I made up this word and you've never seen it before. So just a kind of using the format of a footnote to illustrate a point. So whatever. Let's see. What else? Jordan H. says, this is the problem of methodological relativism that PC seems to raise and in philosophy in general. Don't know if there is a way to solve this. Maybe German idealists could give insights. I was with you up until the German idealist part. I don't know what insights they're going to give us. They're probably just going to make me angry. So let's move on. I don't know about this, but I think it's fun enough to read. Daniel Kelly says, I think William Lane Craig, and if you're not familiar with who William Lane Craig is a philosopher and Christian apologist who is famous for big public debates, and many people herald Craig as one of the greatest Christian debaters ever. I'm not that impressed with Craig's debate and overly structured to me, and I don't think Craig really handles responses, good criticism, very effectively. At least outside the context of a formal debate. I think it's very easy to give the appearance of having a strong debate, having a strong side in a debate or strong position in a debate by saying a whole bunch of stuff that a person can't respond to. And a lot of it is, I think, performative and not really very, very compelling. When I've seen Craig talk about meta-ethics, Craig routinely just catastrophically mischaracterizes anti-realist positions. I do have a few blog posts about it. I think Craig just doesn't appear to me to understand anti-realist positions, pretty much not at all. And that understanding seems to me to be not any better than it doesn't look like a professional philosopher. I've had some people say Craig's not a philosopher. I'm pretty sure Craig is a PhD in philosophy. So Craig is a philosopher. I don't know if that's enough to make you a philosopher. What if you get a PhD and then you never do anything? Do you count as a philosopher? Whatever. But Craig at least has the formal credentials. But I think Craig's just not good at meta-ethics. I'm not saying that Craig isn't good at some other stuff. Maybe Craig is. I'm just saying, look, speaking from my areas of at least some degree of knowledge, like meta-ethics, Craig's takes on meta-ethics look really bad to me. Anyway, so Daniel Kelly says, I think William Lane Craig once said that revelation from the Holy Spirit was evidence enough to overcome any argument. And I doubt an atheist moral realist would respect that blank check. Okay, let me reread this. I was reading it and then not paying attention to what I was reading. I think William Lane Craig once said that revelation from the Holy Spirit was evidence enough to overcome any argument. Okay, yeah, I mean, that might be true. But a lot of times, what analytic philosophers do to as far as their philosophical practice and methods, to me, looks like a bunch of oracles claiming to have, revelations of various kinds. And I've got my revelations and you've got yours. And I think that part of the problem with the insularity of academic philosophy is that because they spend most of their time interacting with one another, they can sort of mutually reassure one another that all their seemings are on point. And I think these epistemic echo chambers ramp up the confidence that philosophers put in intuitions and downgrade their appreciation for the importance of psychological considerations. So, and this is especially true when this is they're all trained reading the same texts. It's like American philosophy that they read it all in English and they work writing in English and they interact with people at the same conferences in the same places. This is not a healthy environment for people that are going to appeal to how things seem to them. If we had just imagine some sort of Star Trek-y type situation where we had aliens from a 1,000 different worlds all engaging with us in philosophy with us. And, Humer and Enoch and some realists are but it seems to me that such and such, you can imagine 900 out of the 1,000 alien civilizations, their representative philosophers would be well, it doesn't seem to me that way. And it's not what are they going to say to all these alien species? What, there's something wrong with your brain? Oh, maybe there's something wrong with your brain. Well, there just seems to be this kind of, I said seems, to me, it seems that there is this remarkable failure to appreciate the path dependencies of your particular degree of enculturation and your environment. And maybe there's just a bunch of contingent features of human brains that makes them work the way they do, that is not reflective of some transcendent capacity for grasping truths beyond the sort of lens through which human minds view the world. And not just human minds, because culture plays such a massive role in shaping how we think. How do we know that this sense of moral facts isn't almost entirely a product of being, of over 2,000 years of Christian theology influencing the way that people think, and with a big fusion of Greek philosophy worked into the mix? Maybe those sort of Western philosophical and religious influences have endowed particular populations with a particular cultural lens through which they see the world, and it's enough that enculturation is so strong in its influence on the way that we think that it causes people to think of the world in terms of cosmic forces of good and evil, and that's why it seems to them like things are right and wrong. But if we could find human populations that didn't have substantial exposure to this, they wouldn't see things this way. Shouldn't we check? Shouldn't we go do that cross-cultural psychological research and find out? Shouldn't we? Because what if we go talk to other populations and they're like, we don't know what the hell you're talking about. That's not how we think about things. We think about them in this way. Why don't you ask us how we think about them? But philosophers don't do that. They don't care. They don't even care about psychology in the United States or in weird populations, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic population. So I've posted on this before, and other people have talked about this before, but most psychological research is on unrepresentative students in the United States. Already our psychological research is unrepresentative of how most of the world thinks. It's not like philosophers have good, systematic, representative access to the populations of the United States. They have whatever students happen to. So, I mean, a particular person might say, well, most of my students say this. Yeah, okay. All of the undergrads in your freshman intro to philosophy course at Princeton, though, that's the sample you're going to draw on. Really, those specific people. That's representative of how. So, 18-year-olds at your university taking intro to ethics. That's how everyone in the world thinks. Okay, maybe that's true. How do you know that's true? Unless you do the research to find out if that's true. Like, there is no way, if you're going to start talking about how people think, of avoiding psychology. I mean, you can, then you're just doing really shitty speculative psychology. And just so much philosophy that, philosophers don't have to make a bunch of psychological claims, but they do. And then if you tell them, hey, maybe your judgments are not that reliable because you're making judgments based on your private experiences, and those may or may not be representative of how other people think, because they'll just say, in virtue of the competence in the English language, then I'm justified in making assertions about how the words work. Yeah, if your view about language is right, how do you know that's right? Like, you didn't do empirical work on that. So philosophers can ignore psychology and linguistics and anthropology all they want. Philosophers are really fond of pointing out how when scientists sneer at philosophy and say, we don't need it to do our work. I don't need philosophy to do physics. I don't need philosophy to do biology. Philosophers will point out, and I think rightly so, look, when you're doing your physics or your biology and you're interpreting your data, you're taking on board certain philosophical assumptions. And you can either explicitly do so and be mindful of the relevant philosophical considerations and do philosophy well, or you could ignore it and downplay it and do it implicitly and probably do a terrible job because you're not understanding it from a principled perspective. I think they're right. But this is a two-way street. When philosophers make claims that interface with human psychology or physics or biology or the sciences, they can either explicitly engage at the empirical research and engage well and competently and be reactive to the best available contemporary evidence on the particular topic, or they can not do so. And they could do shitty, speculative armchair theorizing based on outdated or just outright wrong or just make up psychological. So, I mean, philosophers will say they have what the hell is an intuition? What is it? What type of psychological state? Which mechanisms are involved? How do they work? Are they the same mechanisms for all intuitions, or do some intuitions rely on some mechanisms and different intuitions rely on different mechanisms? Are moral intuitions drawing on the same psychological mechanisms as epistemic intuitions or metaphysical intuitions? Are they? Do you know? Does anyone know? Nobody knows. No one is bothering to do research. So we're relying on psychological mechanisms when no one's bothering to look at how they work. It's not just that philosophers are doing something, I think, that's profoundly mistaken here and wrong and misguided. They're doing something embarrassing to the point that it's like a serious indictment of the field. They go around talking about intuitions all day. No one can be clear. No one typically is clear what the hell an intuition is, how they're supposed to work, how we know about them, it's just made up. It's basically pseudopsychology. And I just no, but it's not psychology though. Okay, if you're making claims about how you're reasoning, you're making claims about psychology. You are. You could either do psychology well, or you could do armchair made up fake pseudopsychology. Those are your only options: actual psychology or pseudopsychology. So pick one. And it looks like a lot of philosophers are going with the made up pseudopsychology, and then just saying it's not psychology over and over and over, and hoping people shut up about it. And maybe a lot of people will. I won't. I won't. I'm going to keep pointing out. There's a reason why I do philosophy and I ended up getting a degree in psychology, is to make this point over and over and over until you could see I'm animated about it, because it's annoying. It's frustrating that a field that could be doing awesome, productive, fascinating work is spinning its wheels on bullshit. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it. Okay, let's move on. It's frustrating. So Exalted asks, do we comprehensively understand mechanisms of complex mathematical reasoning? No, and I'm not sure that we super duper need to. You could apply math and do stuff with math. And if you can't, you can't. But I don't think that we're dealing with quite the same situation when it comes to mathematics. And if you think you are, I could talk about it. But I don't think that's the same sort of thing, because in mathematics, you're following formal procedures and rules, and you can lay them out. We don't need to understand, like, for instance, when someone's examining chess games, I don't think we need to understand like the mechanisms involved in making judgments about what a good or bad chess move is. We can simply say, you can achieve a checkmate in 7 moves or less, or whatever. Or maybe that should be the minimum amount of moves. So, but the point is, like, you could just say, given these procedures, these things follow, and it's just a matter of entailment and that sort of thing. Now, if you're going to say, but there's different approaches to mathematics and different areas of mathematics, yeah, some of this can be navigated intersubjectively, but largely, I see mathematics as a constructed enterprise of rules. You start with some set of rules, and then you look at the implications of the application of those rules under various circumstances. So a lot of it is going to be derivative of some foundational set of axioms. I don't think that you need to demonstrate the axioms are true to consider what would be true conditional on the axioms. And so I don't think mathematics is subject to the same types of concerns that I'm raising. Can we look at the brain and understand whether mathematical reasoning has gone wrong? How would we understand wrongness there? Yeah, I think I don't know, and I don't know that this raises any particular concern for me because of the way that I view mathematics. I don't think mathematical facts are discovered. I think they are constructed, and so I'm going to see it a lot more like I'm going to see chess, and I don't think it's going to be confronted with the sorts of issues that I think that general epistemology and metaphysics are going to be dealing with. Now, of course, someone could argue that my view about mathematics is wrong, and that I need to get more into the metaphysics of mathematics and maybe be more of some kind of Platonist about mathematics. Probably not going to go in for that. And I think once you start doing that, it's going to be recapitulating or echoing many of the same problems that I have with epistemology and metaphysics more broadly. Jonathan Becker points out, no, but there's a huge research program in mathematical learning. Yeah, chances are there's probably a whole bunch of research on math cognition anyway. So this might be largely moot, because there might very well be just a ton of psychological research on mathematical reasoning in the first place. And in any case, the other point I could just make is I could just say that, yes, if we go back to this, here's another move I could make, and it would be perfectly fine for me to make this move. Do we comprehensively understand mechanisms of complex mathematical reasoning? So I don't think that we need to, for the sorts of reasons I've alluded to. But let's say the answer is no, and it is a similar or equivalent problem to philosophy as a whole. Okay, then we should do it for mathematics too. What you're not going to get me to do is say, yeah, I'm just going to be arbitrarily inconsistent and think that epistemology and metaphysics has these huge problems and math just doesn't. Either there's going to be some sort of symmetry breaker or some sort of of difference between the two where I don't think it's an issue for mathematics, and that probably is what I think. But if it is an issue, then I'm just going to say then we should do this for math too, right? So I don't have any issue with that. So I would just say conditionally, either I think it's going to be different in a way where it's not a problem, or it's not, in which case it is a problem, and then we should address that as well. So either way, I don't think this is going to make me go, oh no, like I'm wrong about everything. What I'm not going to do is say I'm committed to this being a non-issue for mathematics, no matter what. And so I guess it's not a problem for, philosophy more generally. In other words, there's that stupid phrase, but one philosopher's modus ponens is another's modus tollens. I'll just, I'll side with there's more issues, not less issues, if necessary. I'm not going to just stick with an inconsistency. All right. Okay, so this is from a while ago, and it's probably when I was asking people to talk about my video. Sam says, yo, that video is fire, the one he's mentioning. I hope that's my video. Unless you're talking about the Olson and Enoch video, it is a good discussion, so check that one out too. Oh, so Sapir Audi, how do I say your name? Says, I agree, I saw it too, and I love Danny. Oh, Danny, are you around? Let me check. Do you, if you, you could come on the stream if you want. I'll have to take a break for a minute, but you're welcome to come on and talk. If you don't, that's cool. Sorry to ask you here. I didn't think, maybe I should have just I don't know, message you and see if you wanted to come on. But you're welcome to come on here. Let's see what else. Okay, I'm really going to need a break in a minute, and I'm running out of water. All right. Cloud of Time says, I just thought of the phrase linguistic bridge collapse. It's a reference to what you were saying about philosophy and the echo chamber construction isolation within academic philosophy. Yeah. Well, you could maybe lay out a comment explaining exactly how this works. And I like cool terms for things. Like I'm happy with my term epistemic blank check. I think it captures what I'm conveying pretty nicely. So I'm happy to. I think it's useful for capturing the view. All right, Sapir says, Lance, I heard you mention the book, The Mind is Flat, in a video, and I checked it out. Really liked the book. Wondering if you could think of any major disagreements you have with it overall. Yes. So I can't remember off the top of my head. I listened to it, 2 months ago, something like that. There was some research cited in there that I think had some significant methodological issues. I'm pretty confident. So I can't remember the specific stuff, but what I remember specifically is that there were studies that came up that were described in there, and there were issues with those studies that I knew about from outside the context of the book. So I think the book might cite some research that faces some problems. In general, some of the cognitive scientific research that the book discusses, I think, is on shaky methodological grounds. And so some of the sort of evidential support for the book might be shakier than is immediately apparent in the book. I doubt Nick Chater would be super opposed to that possibility. It would be something to discuss at some point. Hopefully, that would be cool. But yeah, I think if there's problems with the data, I think that a new version of the book could mention that and address that adequately. And I think it will. But I think that at least the book is on the right track. Okay, Cloud of Time says, I like the Destiny Horn review, but I disagreed with 2 points. Using realist moral language and an argument for moral progress, not begging the question. Also, Destiny knows the distinction between begging the question and raising the question. He used to complain about it a lot until it seemed he got tired of the uphill battle against common usage. So I don't know if you're disagreeing with me or not. Maybe I said, oh no, Destiny doesn't know the distinction. If Destiny does know the distinction, gave up and started using beg the question to mean raises the question, that's totally fine. And my apologies if I said that Destiny doesn't appear to know the distinction. So if you're not aware of this, so beg the question has this particular usage in philosophy where it has the specific meaning where you're presupposing the argument the conclusion of the argument that you're supposed to be arguing for at the outset of an inquiry. And that's, you're begging the question. You're just, assuming you're correct initially at the outset of the argument. Maybe that's not the best formal definition, but whatever. I think it's close enough. But people colloquially will use beg the question to mean something like raises the question, like you were at the scene of the crime. That begs the question, what were you doing? And really that means like that, this consideration prompts or motivates this other consideration, or motivates this particular question. So that's just a different usage of it. It makes more sense given the phrasing, beg the question. Like you're asking for the question. Like to beg is like to implore, to ask, and like I really want this question to be answered. And so given the phrasing, that is a more natural usage of it. And I don't know exactly what Danny and I said when begging the question came up in that particular exchange, but basically somebody in there, I think Destiny said something like, "Oh, that begs the question," so on and so forth. Like it raises the question, it prompts the question. And then I don't know what commentary we gave at the time, but I do recall that I ended up saying something like, I think the war among philosophers to preserve the specifically and distinctively philosophical usage has been lost, and that society's moved on and embraced beg the question, meaning raise the question, and we just need to accept that. We did a little poll on it. I don't remember how many people. Initially, it was just Danny and I voted, and it was 50-50, and it was really kind of goofy. So I don't know where we ended up with that. But yeah, I think the battle has been lost, and it sounds like if that's the case, I agree with Destiny that the battle has been lost. It's just I didn't know that Destiny had already gone through that existential crisis of realizing that there's no way to preserve the special philosophical usage. But I still haven't embraced. I don't say beg the question to mean raises the question, at least not intentionally. I might slip up and accidentally say that, but I prefer not to. And then your other disagreement. I disagree to 2 points: using realist moral language and an argument for moral progress, not begging the question. I'm not sure what the disagreement is. So if you want to talk about that, let me know. Although that was 40 minutes ago. I don't know if you're still here. So Sapir says, considering getting the other book by Chater that you mentioned, which is The Language Game. Yeah, so let me link to that book. One. All right, see if that link works. I actually think it links you straight to the audiobook, but you'll find that Kindle, hardcover, all that stuff there. So The Language Game is it does have an audio version. I listened to the audio version of The Language Game and The Mind is Flat, so you could get them on Audible. So that is by Christensen and Chater. Created language and changed the world. I believe Christensen and Chater also have a more technical book. I'll mention it at least. Yeah, and that book is called Creating Language, Integrating Evolution, Acquisition, and Processing. So they take a largely anti-Chomsky approach to language. That isn't to say they're just saying Chomsky's wrong and that's it. But they do critique Chomsky in The Language Game. And then they put forward a newer account of language where they treat language as this kind of improvisational tool that, they frequently rely on characterizing it as like a game of charades, and it's just like a really elaborated and sophisticated game of charades. I think a big theme of the book is that we didn't need to or have any distinctive, highly specialized set of psychological adaptations that distinctively were favored by natural selection for the production of language, but rather that language is a product, it's a culturally acquired technology that was developed by cobbling together the resources of available psychological processes to create language out of those tools. Now, I don't recall exactly what they say in the book, but it wouldn't be surprising if once that tool is created, that there then becomes novel selective pressures for utilizing that tool well. So you do get stuff like that in evolution when you talk about behavior, when available psychological mechanisms lead to novel behaviors, there can then become novel selective pressures for the degree to which the members of a particular population are disposed to engage in those behaviors. So if a species like a human population develops writing and writing is super adaptive, then to the extent that you're good at writing, that you'll have a selective advantage. So it's not like this is totally unaffected by natural selection. They're not arguing for something as absurd as that. I mean, just check the book out. It's a very cool book. And it changed the way I viewed language, at least. And I think it really, in some interesting and indirect ways, supports a lot of the concerns that I have with philosophy, which might sound weird, like a book on language cognition somehow being relevant, but I think it's super duper relevant. And it's an area of research that I'm interested in shifting over towards reading more about. I don't have direct training though in linguistics. And so it's a bit of tough go to really study that stuff effectively. Okay. I'm going to keep working through stuff to try to get caught up. Jordan H asks, what do you think is the best solution? Oh, I didn't even check if Danny agreed to drop in. Let me ask, or sorry, let me check. Danny, where are you at? Okay, I don't see. So give me a second. Okay. Back to Jordan H. Danny, if you're around, let me know. Sorry, I asked if you were there and then I didn't even check. Jordan H says, what do you think is the best solution to solve the sort of relativism in seemings in PC and metaphilosophy? If you don't know, what are your thoughts? Yeah, I'd say the best solution is to be a pragmatist. All right. Growing Pains says, you can tell by how good you are at explaining your position. You don't think what you're saying is just being bad faith. Yeah, I'm reluctant to say people are being bad faith. People might genuinely believe, like, they're not being dishonest and accusing you of dishonesty. They might seriously just be so flabbergasted by something you say that they really think you don't mean it. Maybe that's the context of me talking about people saying that I'm pretending to have the views that I have on philosophy, unconsciousness or ethics or something like that. So Cloud of Time asks, could they be accused of lying about you pretending? Maybe they're just arrogantly mistaken, but it seems like you could throw the rhetoric back at them. Yeah, I could. I could say, yeah. So I could respond to people saying, you're lying about your views by saying, oh, well, you're lying about your views. It's not going to get us anywhere, and they're not going to take it seriously. The irony there is they wouldn't take it seriously. So what do they expect me to do? Take them seriously? They say you're lying, and I go, oh shit, you got me. I guess I don't think that. You caught me red-handed. I don't think my views about metaethics. I mean, it's just it's so. Of course, I'm not going to do that. It's true, but two, let's say I was lying. What am I going to do? Oh no, you accuse me of lying, so I'll admit it. Like what? What do they think they're adding to the conversation by telling me I'm lying or pretending? People like to say pretending. It's so bizarre. I really don't understand the psychology of people saying you're pretending. I don't know what they're doing. And the thing is, I don't want to speculate about people's psychology. I just want them to stop doing it. I want to have a conversation about they have their view, I have mine. If they don't want to engage with my view because they think I'm lying, okay. Then don't engage with the view. I guess that doesn't benefit either of us, but it's their prerogative to think I'm lying if they want to. There's nothing I can do about it. But I'm certainly not going to argue with them about that because there's no point. If someone has so little confidence in you that you tell them your view for the first time and they don't know me. It's not like I'm constantly lying. Like I'm like, I don't believe in trees, all the time. And then I'm like, I got to avoid this tree. Hold on. I don't think cups are real. 1 second, I got to put my cup down. If I was constantly acting like that all the time around them, like they were my roommate in grad school, and then they're like, yeah, Lance is full of shit. He's always saying he doesn't believe in stuff that he totally clearly believes in. Fine. But that's not the situation we're in. I have people that have never met me and don't know anything about me that like watch a video and are like, yeah, you're pretending. Now, sorry, I shouldn't say that it's like everybody's always telling me I'm pretending. It's just this has happened like 5 or 6 times, and then it just really bugs me. But I do think I don't think probably part of it is the way that I express my views on certain sorts of things. But part of it is just that a lot of philosophers just like whether they take a pro stance or an anti stance on a particular issue, like realism, even the anti stance, those people will often grant that that like the pro stance is intuitive. So like someone might say, yeah, look, I'm an illusionist, but I understand why people have the intuition. There's quality. I have this intuition. I just don't think that there are. Um, but because I frequently just don't have the intuitions at all, that makes me a bit of an outlier with respect to people that are actually in philosophy. What I found though is that a lot of people outside of philosophy actually also don't have whatever intuition reigns supreme in the field. And it's pretty annoying to for those people to I think that part of this is a selection effect. And that if you're not intuitiony, you like kind of get discouraged from going into a field where everybody else has intuitions you just don't have. Okay, so let's look at some more comments. I'm trying to get caught up. Yeah, so Growing Pain says if people indicate that they don't think you're being honest with them, there's little point in interacting with them at all. I agree, and so I don't for the most part. So if someone thinks that I'm like pretending to have my philosophical views, typically what I'd like to do, and what I have done at least a couple times, is say, look, I know if you think that, but I'd love to sit down and have a conversation with you. Like, like it doesn't have to be on a live stream. It doesn't have to be a recorded conversation. Let's just have a conversation. And I'm pretty confident if people talk to me, like it just like in StreamYard when I'm not recording or something, they'd be like, yeah, it's not, I don't think this person's lying anymore. Like it's just, unless I'm not like some kind of professional actor. Like I wouldn't be that good at it. So yeah, I invite people that people don't typically take me up on that. So whatever. So Jordan H says, if we get rid of the concept of justification, ideally, how are we to tell the difference between true and false beliefs? Yeah, so it just depends on what you mean by justification. I don't think that we need to get rid of certain terminology. It's really that philosophers will often. I don't have a good term for this. Okay, I'm going to come back to this. I really need a break. I'm going to take a break for like 3 or 4 minutes. I'm going to grab a drink and do all that stuff. And then I'm going to come back. And then I'm going to try to, in fact, I'll make a note of where I'm at because I want to talk about this. It's something that occurred to me earlier today. Okay, so I will come back to that when I get back. And sorry, Danny, I don't know where you're at, but if you come back around, you'd be happy. I'd be happy to have you join the stream. Okay, I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Oh, right. I'm back. Okay, so here is the issue that this brings to mind. Where was that comment at? if we get rid of the concept of justification, ideally, how are we to tell the difference between true and false beliefs? The short answer is I wouldn't get rid of the concept of justification. I would sort of jettison the analytic philosophers' a prioristic rationalist conception of justification and replace it with a pragmatic account of justification and knowledge and truth and all that sort of thing. And I would reorient our approach to asking and addressing philosophical questions around a pragmatist approach to these sorts of things. And that approach, I think, would circumvent many of the problems that I think philosophers get themselves tangled up in. Getting to know exactly why that's the case is way beyond, like, that would be like an epic discussion. And I want to kind of move around and move fluidly through things. So what I would say for now is where my leanings are starting to move in the direction of is towards the work of classical pragmatists, in particular the work of William James and F.C.S. Schiller. Part of the reason for this might be just because of who I happen to talk to, but I have a friend who is a Schiller scholar, and I had never heard of Schiller. And when I would say the sorts of things that I say about philosophy, analytic philosophy, the state of the field, my views about like language issues that I have, and a lot of this stuff is like my concerns with language are things that arose out of me studying a psychology, like working on a psychology PhD, studying the empirical research on the psychology of metaethics, having all these issues with the way I was seeing philosophers talk about metaethics and the way that I saw psychologists talking about metaethics and seeing all these issues that kept re-emerging over and over. And I started developing concerns. Now, I didn't develop them in a vacuum. I'm not reinventing the wheel. It's not like I had never heard of James and never read anything from James. I don't think I'd ever heard of Schiller. Maybe it was a name in a reference somewhere, but I hadn't read any Schiller. Anyway, I made this friend who works with the Schiller and pragmatism and that sort of thing. And they started having the sense that like, you're really saying stuff very similar to Schiller. And I was like, am I really curious? And they were like, no, you don't understand. It's like uncanny. And they would send me quotes from Schiller. And I'm like, wow, yeah, I'm on board with that. And so finding someone that already thinks things very similar to me might be not the best way to develop a view. But when you have a view that isn't super common in the field, it is nice to get some degree of validation from seeing other people that have similar perspectives. Now, I don't agree with Schiller about everything, but that my inclinations do lie in that direction. And so it's not that I want to get rid of the notion of like I'm not going to get rid of the word justification. It's just that I'm going to take a very different approach towards these sorts of questions than I think a lot of analytic philosophers do. Now, my own personal approach to addressing these questions is less constructive. It's more critical. I'm mostly going to raise concerns with their approach and not so much offer solutions. I think that's going to be a job for someone else. That's just my disposition. I want to critique. I'm less of a builder and more of a destroyer, I guess you could say. So having said all that, take a look at this question again from Jordan H. If we get rid of the concept of justification, ideally, how are we to tell the difference between true and false beliefs? I would offer a pragmatist conception of justification and true and false. Now, what you'll often see from philosophers, and I think this is especially true of the more rationalistically inclined philosophers, the less empiricist philosophers, is you'll see this sort of thing come up. So there are these various views in philosophy of mind, particularly on the question of consciousness. There's illusionism, which holds that people are generally subject to this illusion that their consciousness exhibits certain characteristics, that it has these intrinsic qualitative properties that are private and inaccessible and so on, qualia, or phenomenal states. But it doesn't really have these states. So it's a kind of conjunction of people think they have qualia, but they don't. Now, I don't even think people think they have qualia. I don't think the empirical research supports that. But I also don't think that there are qualia. I think that qualia, the concept of qualia makes sense, but it happens to be that the term doesn't refer to a thing that's real. It's rather that I don't think that the term qualia refers to anything that is real, if I'm going to be really picky and specific about how I want to phrase what I'm saying. I could probably be even more picky than that because someone might even have an issue with that. When you think a term is meaningless and then you start saying, I don't think that this meaningless thing refers to something that's real, sometimes people will say stuff like, how can you use the word if you don't think it's meaningful? And that can get really frustrating really quickly where, look, I don't think, like, if you read some nonsense line, like if someone says something from Dr. Seuss or something, where it's all the florps, flibbled and dibbled. Like it's someone made up nonsense words that kind of vaguely sound like they might be in English. Yeah, I don't think florps are real. I don't know what a florp is, but like, I mean, how can I phrase it where someone's not going to say that's a metaphysical problem? My view of what the world is like there isn't a thing called a florp that I think about that's running around in the world and like, oh, there's a florp right over there. It doesn't have florps in it. Now, I don't think I have to know what a florp is to know that it does it like exactly what it is. But in any case, I don't want to get into dealing with that particular question. What I want to get into is this particular issue that philosophers will say regarding, say, illusionism or eliminativism, views that deny that phenomenal consciousness exists, is the critic will say they don't believe in consciousness. Now, the problem is that what people will do is this very Mott and Bailey tricky sort of thing with words, where here's how a conversation might go. Someone will say, yeah, of course, there's a hard problem of consciousness. Of course, subjective experience exists. And if you say, and you're an illusionist, and you say something like, look, like, I don't believe in phenomenal consciousness. I don't think that's real. Oh, so you don't believe people have experiences? Like, this is how the critic might reply. And the dialogue might be, no, they do think people have experiences. How can you say people have experiences if you don't even think that they have qualia or phenomenal states? So the issue that emerges from these sorts of exchanges is that the critic will insist that the illusionist does not believe in consciousness. They don't think, they don't think people have experiences, right? But there's a problem here, is that the problem is that we have these terms: subjective experience, what it's like to have an experience, what it's like in general. There's something it's like to be me. I can see images in my mind. There's all this sort of language that we use to describe subjective experiences and talk about phenomenology. Now, the illusionist does not deny that something is going on. And they may, I mean, they're going to have different views on what terminology to use, but it's completely consistent with illusionism about consciousness to say consciousness exists, phenomenology is real, people do have subjective experiences. It just doesn't have the metaphysical characteristics that proponents of the hard problem think that it has, or it's, in some cases, maybe the epistemic characteristics as well, like that it's private and inaccessible and can't be described in third personal terms. So the problem is that you'll have this terminology that has at least to a degree, more theoretically open-ended, if not theoretically neutral. We could say more theoretically neutral usage. So terms like experience, subjectivity, that can be used in a way that is consistent with multiple views on the nature of consciousness, including illusionism. So let's just take experience. An illusionist can believe in experience. They just don't believe experiences are characterized by phenomenal states or qualia. Let's go with phenomenal state. So they can think experiences are real so long as they don't think that what it means for an experience to be real is that it is constituted by or characterized or has or involves in some way phenomenal states. Fine. So if you say, I don't believe there are phenomenal states, it does not mean you must say, I don't think people have experiences. You could just say, yeah, people have experiences. They just don't involve phenomenal states. But critics will say, well, look, because experiences just are or require phenomenal states, you really don't believe in experiences. And so the problem here is that you have the theoretically neutral use of the term experience, and then you have like experience sub P, which you could say experience sub philosophical count one, or sub phenomenal or whatever. The point is that the term experience can be used in both the more theoretically neutral term that is consistent with illusionism and the less theoretically neutral term where it involves the presuppositions that characterize an anti-illusionist position on the nature of consciousness. And proponents of that view will often just insist on not being clear about the distinction between the two. And they'll say, you can't have one without the other. You don't get to go around. You're not allowed to say, as if say we have experiences if you're an illusionist, because experiences just are, or at least logically require. They don't even have to think they logically require. They could just say, look, my account of what an experience is that it involves phenomenal states. You don't believe there's phenomenal states, so you don't think there's experiences. This is really, really silly. This is like someone saying, look, I think love is magical. And if you don't think love is magical, you don't believe in love. And the problem here is just someone failing to draw a distinction between their particular account of the phenomenon in question and the phenomenon in question, independent of whether their particular account is correct or not. And so what people will do is exactly that sort of thing. Like, you could go around saying, yeah, I love my family. And they go, hold up. You told me you don't believe in magic. And since love is magical, then you can't love your family. And they're like, no. I love my family. I just don't think that love involves magic. No, you can't do that because love is magical. Therefore, you don't love your family. It's someone just fundamentally failing to draw a distinction between their perspective on what something is and that thing, independent of whether their perspective about it happens to be the one exclusive and only correct answer to what that thing, like the correct thing is, what that account. I got all tangled up in my words, but they're failing to draw a distinction between what the thing is, independent of whether their particular account of it is correct, and their account of it, right? And they're just treating their account of it as though it just the terms in question just are or refer to their particular account. And so to deny their account is to deny the thing itself. And so if you don't think experiences involve phenomenal states, you don't think there's experiences. And there's just something profoundly, obviously, transparently question begging about this, because the person with the opposing view isn't saying, hey, I agree with your account of what this thing must be were it to be real, and I don't think it has those characteristics, so I don't think it's real. They're not. That's not the disagreement. The disagreement is what the nature of the thing is. And so the illusionist does not have to think experiences don't occur. They disagree with you about the nature of experiences. So they're like, yes, experiences occur, but they don't involve phenomenal states. You're wrong about them involving phenomenal states. So it's really weird to say, no. Because experiences do involve phenomenal states, therefore you can't believe in experiences. Philosophers do this all the damn time. Now, the thing is, they do it all the time. It is, there's not a nice way to say this, so I'm just not going to say it nicely. It's profoundly stupid. Profoundly stupid. It's stupid. They should know better, and they don't. It's a type of learned incompetence on the part of academic philosophers that they do this all the damn time, where they just can't distinguish between their views and like a more neutral characterization of the view. And so you'll see all these people online, professional philosophers, this person doesn't believe in consciousness. That person doesn't believe in morality. I've had people tell me I cannot believe in morality because I'm a moral anti-realist. What the hell does that mean? I can't, what do you mean I don't believe in morality? Like, because it makes it sound like I don't think there's moral institutions. I don't think there's moral judgment. Like, so someone on the street says, murder is wrong. And I say, that doesn't exist. Like, what is it that I think they didn't say it? Like, I think the words don't, like, what is it that they think you can't believe in? No, if I say I don't believe that there are stance-independent moral facts, I don't agree with you that that's what morality is. So it's not that if I don't believe in stance-independent moral facts, I can't believe in morality. It's that I think morality is real. I think it's like, what? Okay, so what is it for morality to be real? Well, it's real that people use moral language. It's real that there are cognate terms in other languages and similar enough usages of other terms in other languages that like they engage in moral discourse. So moral discourse is real. Certain kinds of like moral judgment is real. Moral psychology is real. The word morality is real. Moral systems are real. So there's all kinds of things that I think are real and that I use moral language to refer to those things. And I am not using it in a weird and idiosyncratic way. Like if there's a group of people that engage in certain moral practice, like, okay, like take a religious moral system, like a Christian moral system. I think Christians have moral systems. I don't even endorse the moral systems, but they're clearly moral systems, like the 10 Commandments or something. There you go. There's a moral code. I think moral codes exist. Like, what do they think I'm saying? Those that, like, why would you even say if you're an anti-realist, you don't think morality is real? That's just so unclear. And this is another thing. It's not just that philosophers do all these goofy conflations and say things that are just confused and mangled conceptually beyond recognition. They also say things that are so ridiculously and obviously ambiguous and unclear. Again, it's super embarrassing, and they do it all the time. It just, it's embarrassing. Like, I'm embarrassed that philosophers conduct themselves in this way so frequently. Okay. So yeah, I don't know what to call that kind of conflation, but the conflation between the theoretically neutral usage of certain terminology and one specific account, and then mixing the two up, and then on the thing, then you don't believe in the thing. And this is, I think, part of why I like, so when you say, if we get rid of the concept, so when Jordan H says, if you get rid of the concept of justification, ideally, how are we to tell the difference between true and false beliefs? I just wouldn't get rid of the concept. I would revise it. Now, I might have said things that imply that I want to get rid of it, and that's my mistake. That's my fault. So apologies. I want to get rid of bad conceptions of justification, but I'm totally happy to use the term justification. And it's not like I wouldn't use it in everyday discourse. It's not like if someone did something that I thought was really unreasonable and say, you are completely not justified in making that judgment. I would use that language. I would just use it in a way consistent with my particular philosophical views, or I might not even use it in a way that's particularly principled at all. Okay, I said a lot about that, so let me move on. Okay, lots of people talking to each other. ASM says, I got here just in time for the rant. I think I've done several of them. So when did you say that? 3:07. What was I ranting about 30 minutes ago? I've been at this for about 2 hours now. So, yeah, I've probably done a few of them. Arnaldo Vera says, have you ever read Nietzsche? He seems pretty close to your position from the continental philosophy side. I've read a little bit. I read Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I read Walter Kaufmann's book. I think it's called Nietzsche, Philosopher, Psychologist, Antichrist, something like that. It was a cool book. So I read that stuff. I wrote one paper on Nietzsche as an undergrad, and that's it. I didn't return. It was on the Übermensch concept. Jordan H asks, how do you view philosophy is different from science generally? Are they the same? So I don't think that they're the same. I tend to view philosophy and science as these sort of human constructions where they're both sort of, so I'm going to take a broadly empiricist view. You could call me like a really radical empiricist. And I'm going to see science and philosophy as institutions that have been developed by people. They have particular sorts of ingrained methods, presuppositions, approaches, ways that they do things, problems that they tend to focus on. I think that their methods ought to be treated. I'm saying this prescriptively, like how we should do philosophy and science, as broadly continuous with one another. And so you could see me in some ways as having similar features to the way naturalists tend to approach things. Although I'm not going to take on board the metaphysical assumptions of a lot of the more naturalist approaches that philosophers take. I'm going to be pretty anti-metaphysics. So I see the methods as broadly continuous with one another. I think philosophers and scientists are basically doing the same sorts of stuff for much of the time. And so basically it's a big Venn diagram. Some of the stuff scientists are doing might be separate in practice from philosophers, and some of the stuff philosophers are doing, like conceptual work and that sort of thing, is separate from what scientists do. But there's enough overlap where it would be, I think, ridiculous to try to do science without doing any conceptual work. And I think it would be pretty ridiculous to do a lot of philosophy, certain areas of philosophy, without engaging with the science at all. There's probably areas where philosophers and scientists can and do get by without doing much of one another's work at all. And I don't see a problem with that. But the bridges between them, I think, need to be very wide, and there need to be a lot of them. But I don't think it means every person working on a scientific issue needs to be thinking about philosophy or reading Plato. And I don't think everybody doing philosophy needs to crack open textbooks and learn about physics. I think that would be excessive and absurd. And there's enough room in both disciplines for people to be doing functionally autonomous work a lot of the time. But I don't think the disciplines as a whole should be autonomous from one another. Exalted says, will someone with your views about mathematics have to deflect objections to conventionalist philosophy of math? I mean, you might be right, but maybe I think I would succeed at dealing with those objections. So, I can't address every issue in every discussion all the time, and maybe I would succeed or fail. If I succeeded, then I'd be happy to continue saying what I was saying earlier. And if not, then I would update my views, hopefully, and not be super motivated and obnoxious about it and stick to my guns no matter what. Cloud of Time says, for clarity, Destiny doesn't use beg the question as raises the question. He just seems to have stopped correcting people because of how often they use it to mean raise the question. I'd have to go back to the video. I'm pretty sure the reason I commented on it is because somebody in the discussion said begs the question in a way where they were using it to mean raises the question. That's my recollection. It could be inaccurate. Cloud of Time is returning to that remark from earlier. Cloud of Time says, I think the implicit argument for moral progress from objectivists begs the question in that if laid out formally, the concept of progress must assume an objective moral goal. Maybe I'm incorrect. Yeah, I mean, if they're going to stick with progress, a paper on this arguing for moral convergence, and I think that gets around the problem. So you could just argue that to the extent that people's moral values tend to converge over time, then the best explanation for that could be that people are learning what the moral facts are. So I think convergent, you just switch over to convergence and then you get around that problem. So as much as I would like to say, here's an easy win against an argument for realism, I don't think this is one of them. You just drop progress, go with convergence, which is one of the reasons I think it's really weird that like T-Jump is always saying moral progress and moral intuitions. And I would focus on convergence rather than progress because you want to avoid that question begging vibe to it. Does Chater, this is from MG, does Chater deal with inner speech? This is an old debate about language being for thought versus communication. It's obviously not for either. This looks like it's continued. Corrected to Chater. MG continues, but I haven't the foggiest idea of what many diverse with self-reported inner speech, some 95%, which has the form and neural correlates and mechanisms of syntax. Oh, wow, there's a lot here. Why continued? Looking for it. People are so happy to construct big stories like it's communicative in nature. Which parts of language? The convergent evolution of birdsong-like mechanisms, not buying any stories right now, in my opinion. I'd have to go look at the book. I can't tell you offhand how much they address inner speech there. I wish I remembered. I often have pretty poor retention for stuff. I might need to read the book a couple times to really have it sink in. There's some back and forth on the argument from progress. So Cloud of Time also says, for clarity, I didn't mean you could throw the liar rhetoric back at them by accusing them of lying about their views, but ask if they're lying about you being a liar. They would probably just say no if I asked. So just trying to get caught up. Yeah, so Sapir says, pretty sure I heard Humer say that when people deny having realist intuitions, that they're probably just applying their anti-realist theory. And this is what people will tell me if I deny phenomenal consciousness or qualia, and I reject that there even is a hard problem of consciousness in the first place. You know, so another thing people might say, just not, most people are not going to say that you're pretending to have contrary views. It's just a few people that have said this. So don't let me exaggerate how common that is. It's not common. Most people aren't like that. But another thing people might say is, yeah, but you're thinking that, not that they think that this is like a debunking argument, that they're giving an explanation for why you think it, but they might say, okay, but you may think that because of your naturalist commitments or something like that. Like the reason you're an illusionist is because of your broader worldview. And that worldview is like broadly naturalistic. You don't want to believe in supernatural and non-natural phenomenon. And so in order to be consistent with the rest of your commitments, this view, in light of the rest of your commitments, looks really plausible to you. And they're probably right about that. But of course, they don't have to say, and because I could explain why you think it, therefore it's wrong. That they don't have to think something silly like that. But there's often this presumption that if you report not having intuitions or you report not endorsing a view, that this is downstream of your other commitments. But I think that one, they're speculating about what's causing what. But I don't think in the case of realism, I don't recall a time I ever had these realist intuitions. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But I'm not applying a theory. I don't think what they're talking about makes any sense. And there's not a theory going on there. And in any case, even if I was applying a theory, which theory? So Humer takes this much more structured approach where it's like, oh, well, you think that because of error theory or because of relativism or because of the semantic thesis. But I throw that entire framework out. I don't even have, I think the entire approach that Humer uses for considering engaging in semantic analysis of moral claims it's just a bad approach. And I reject the approach itself. So I'm certainly not applying one of the conventional sort of traditional anti-realist theories because I don't endorse any of them. And unfortunately, my impression, I've had at least one person give me some pushback on this, that Humer is pretty insistent that basically you've got three options: some type of expressivism, some type of relativist cognitivism, and some type of error theory. And I don't endorse any of those because I reject the semantic thesis behind all of those views. So what can you do? I mean, I guess you have to get more metaphilosophical and go more fundamental. But yeah, I'm not applying a theory, and it's pretty. Not that there'd be anything wrong with one. I'm not doing that. That's not what my psychology of this is looking like. If it's intended to be a claim that's casting doubt on whether you actually don't have realist intuitions, then I might raise the objection. I don't have realist intuitions, and maybe that's because of antecedent philosophical commitments that have landed on humor would know that. Spear says you'll never catch up to the chat lens. I will. I'm getting quicker. Exalted says, ahaha. I read a paper about epistemic normativity instrumentalism, and one consideration for complying to evidence standards is to be convenient to other people. It's benefits from social acceptance. Yeah, I mean, that would be one motivation. It doesn't have to be the worst motivation in the world to be accepted by other people. I'm looking through. I'm still trying to get caught up on the chat. Stuff about language. This is a funny question. So Jim Cummins says, Lance, have you experienced any new fruits or desserts lately? Well, it's hard to try new fruits because I've tried most of the ones that I could readily get my hands on. I'm trying to think, did I try a new dessert lately? Not a like completely new dessert. Oh wait, I did. Okay, I'm trying to think. Give me a second. It was a galette. I think it's like a French like pastry type thing, and then there's fruit on top. So I had a galette with various types of fruit, and then it had lemon lavender ice cream. Yeah, and they didn't overdo it on the lavender, so that was really nice. That whole thing. It might sound strange, but the whole thing kind of worked. So I had that. That was nice. Okay, that's a weird question, but whatever. I'll answer it. I don't object to the question. I love talking about food. This is something I can mention. I've talked about doing a food and philosophy channel. My wife has suggested it. I don't want to mention the name because I don't want someone to take the name before I get it. But yeah, the idea was she noticed that I'm pretty bad. And early on my live streams, a lot of my thumbnails had food, and I've put a food theme on some of them before. Like I was eating cheesecake during one of them. So basically, I'm really bad at multitasking, and she noticed that I'm bad at multitasking, and that it would be funny for me to try to cook while teaching people about psychology or philosophy or whatever, like trying to talk about whatever I'm doing now while doing like cooking, because it often happens like I'll be in the kitchen making dinner or something, and I start doing what I'm doing now to her, which is probably pretty unfortunate for her that she has to listen to me go about epistemology and phenomenal conservatism. And then I'll just be like, let's say I'm in the middle of stirring something, right? And then I'll just be holding the spoon, talking. And then she's like, yeah, you haven't stirred that for like 10 minutes. So it would be fun to try. If I'm going to cook, it's more likely I'll do more baking. But I mean, we'll see. But to do that, really, sorry, I'm so thirsty because I've been talking for like 2 hours. I'm going to need better equipment, better cameras, like probably more than one camera. So a couple cameras that are better quality, like some kind of mic that I can move with, because my mic is right over here and I probably sound better if I'm over there, but I don't even have a microphone arm. So I'm going to need better equipment to do that. And when I do it, I'll consider it because I think that would be a lot of fun for everybody. Okay. Okay. So flandational philosophy. One of my first streams, I had flan during it. Well, Fuji. So shouldn't call it flan. All right. So I did get caught up to the chat despite people's doubts that I would be able to do so. I probably never responded to Danny, and Danny left and went and did something else like an hour or something ago. I'm sorry, Danny. Come back. Um, okay, so other stuff to talk about. So that all went off of a single blog post, and then I started all that stuff. So let me talk about some other things. Oh, I should link the blog post that I started this whole thing 2 hours ago with. It's not one of my best blog posts. It's kind of short, and I just dashed it off. It was originally going to be a comment, but I think it's like paid subscribers only can comment or something. So I just was like, whatever, I'll just make a blog post. So there's that. So let's get into some of the other stuff. All right. So I guess I'll mention again that I did do this review with Danny from Phil Talk of the Trent Horn and Destiny debate. So check that out. I linked that earlier. Other stuff worth talking about. Oh, right. So that response, I also discussed some stuff that Patrick Flynn for the people. There's a YouTube channel. There's a blog on Substack, and hopefully, because I invited Patrick to have a discussion about meta ethics at some point. I don't know if that's going to happen, but actually, so that particular blog from Patrick Flynn was my first blog post. Was a response, like first ever one, and I'm up to like 130 something blog posts now. The first one ever was a response, and so it was cool to kind of return to where I started a year ago when I started the blog before I even had this channel and respond to some of that work. And so I could go through some of that now and talk about some of those comments. So I will do that. So here's that blog post. And it also has a link to the Trent Horn Destiny review with Danny. So 2 for 1 on that. So let me pin that. Boom. Okay, so you got that. So let's go through this. So Patrick says, and you could just follow along. So I have my commentary that's on the blog, and it's a written commentary that's a response to Patrick's commentary that was response to Trent Horn and Destiny. So it's commentary on commentary on commentary. So it's super meta, but whatever, we're doing it. So Patrick says, after all, if somebody is forced into nihilism to justify their take on abortion, that it's probably because the pro-life side has some powerful argumentation behind it. So you could definitely check out the full blog post from Patrick for the full context. I don't want you to get a sense that I'm pulling quotes out that are unfairly ignoring things. I don't think I'm doing that. And if more context would be needed, I'd be happy to provide it. Anyway, the rough idea here is that Destiny brings up an anti-realist view of morality while simultaneously taking a normative stance. Again, like I think Destiny calls the stance a pro-abortion stance, as opposed to a pro-life stance, or you could say anti-abortion stance. 1 second. And so the idea here is that if you're going to both defend a pro-abortion stance, like access to abortion, abortion rights sort of thing, and defend an anti-realist view in meta-ethics, someone might say, okay, so you're falling back on this anti-realist view in order to get around the problems you would face in the normative domain if you were to be a realist. And so I think that's what's motivating this remark. So let's look at the remark again. In fact, I'll put it in the chat. There's the remark. After all, if somebody is forced into nihilism to justify, it's in quotes, that's why I'm saying it that way, their take on abortion, that it's probably because the pro-life side has some powerful argumentation behind it. Now, I don't want to get into whether that's true or not. I want to get into this notion of if somebody's forced into nihilism. Now, first, I don't like that term nihilism, because nihilism can often be understood to mean like the view that there's no purpose or meaning or value to the world of any kind at all. It's like this, and I think that sometimes it's used in a way that bleeds into or has substantive normative implications, not just meta-ethical ones. And so I think it could be misleading to say that if you're an anti-realist, you are a nihilist. Sometimes realists will say anti-realism or relativism leads to nihilism, or you have no choice but to get into nihilism, where that's understood to mean that you yourself are committed to this view that the world has no life, purpose, or value, or meaning, or whatever. Now that goes right back to that fallacy that I just talked about, where philosophers will take their own account to be the only possible correct account. And so if you don't endorse their account, you don't believe in the thing at all. You know, so a realist might say, look, if you don't think morality is subjective, you just don't believe in morality. And it's easy to satirize this by saying, okay, well, I think morality is magical. And if you don't believe morality is magical, then you don't believe in morality. And you could do this for anything. You could say, I think tables are magical. So you point at a table and say, do you think that's a magical table? And a person says, no. And you go, so you don't believe the table's there? And they're like, no, I think the table's, no, you said the table's not magical. Tables are magical. My view is that tables are magical. All tables are magical. So if you don't think that table's magical, you don't think there's a table there. What the hell does that mean? Because the person could say, no, I think this, look, I could touch the table. I could eat food at the table. I could sit in a chair at the table. I can move the table around. I could feel the table. I could see the table. I could hear the table if you drop it, right? They could point out all these things they could do with respect to the table and say, in that respect, I think there's a table there. What I don't think is that the table is magical. So I think there is a table, but it's not magical. You could always respond by saying, no, tables are magical. By definition, I'm defining tables as magical. And so if you don't think that table's magical, you don't think there's a table there. Now notice that they're mixing up their account of there's a thing that you could touch and see and feel and move around and eat your dinner on and all those things. And in addition to that, it has the property of being magical, whatever the hell that means. But it's as if they're implying that the other person is required to deny all the other things in order to deny. It's ridiculous. I don't know why philosophers do this. Do they not understand the difference between these two things? It's like they don't understand the difference between their definitions of things and the things independent of their definitions of things. It's so weird. But, and this is why sometimes realists will say, if you're an anti-realist or a relativist or whatever, that collapses into nihilism. Maybe. I don't think it does. Things matter to me. I just reject your account of things mattering. I reject your account of value. So the anti-realist is not obligated to say the only sense in which things can matter or be valuable is the realist sense, but realism is wrong. So there is no sense in which anything matters or is valuable. The anti-realist is well within their rights philosophically, like dialectically, to say, it's not just that I reject realism. I reject the realist account of the only that there is only one way in which things matter or could be good or valuable or meaningful. I reject that too. And so when realists say stuff like, yeah, if you're an anti-realist, then nothing matters. Yeah, nothing matters stands independently. Nothing matters in a realist sense. But it doesn't follow that nothing matters in an anti-realist sense. And the realist can say until they're blue in the face, no, nothing matters, full stop. That's the very view I'm contending. You don't get to insist on that as a feature of the dialectic, or else you are begging the question. And so there's just this issue. And notice it's always the people taking positive stances, the metaphysically robust. It doesn't, when I say always, I don't mean literally always. In my experience, typically. But of course, these are the people I tend to argue with. So maybe anti-realist skeptics do this same nonsense too. That wouldn't make it any better or more justified. Anyway, so man, maybe I needed a longer break. So what I say there is, I'm not a fan of the framing here. I don't think Destiny or anyone else is forced into nihilism in order to justify their normative ethical views. This makes it seem like nihilism is some kind of fallback position one has to retreat to. I deny this, and I think other anti-realists should deny this too. Anti-realists aren't forced into anything to endorse moral anti-realism. I also doubt it has much to do with the abortion debate. Moral anti-realism is consistent with being both for and against the moral permissibility of abortion. It's just an orthogonal question. So being an anti-realist doesn't help you endorse any particular view on a normative question. It doesn't really have much to do with it. I mean, unless your normative view is like, you're just going to say no to all normative views. I mean, maybe then on some versions of anti-realism, but not even all of them. So I say a bit more and not worth getting into. So I'll skip over this third point, I think. Let me have a look at that. No, I'll go into that. So Patrick says this. And I'll post that. It got cut off. In fact, there appears to be a parallel between the pro-choice party adopting moral anti-realism and the reductive naturalist embracing eliminativism, doesn't there? Both seem like nuclear options, something the respective parties are forced to adopt because all other explanatory options available to their paradigm have been exposed as seriously defective, and for whatever reason, they cannot embrace a paradigm shift. Now, I very strongly disagree with this. Notice the framing here, that it's like the anti-realist or the eliminativist or whatever has a paradigm. They really want to apply the paradigm, and so they reject all these other views as defective, and they're just not willing to reconsider their views. It's this view that in virtue of your theoretic commitments, you end up like, yeah, you want to be a naturalist, and so you have to end up being, pro-abortion. And so, so the view is just wrong because you are just stubbornly insisting on your naturalistic worldview. That I think is the framing that a lot of people in a position like mine are subject to when it comes to anti-realism or illusionism or various sorts of issues. Which again, there's no inconsistency between being an anti-realist and having any normative attitude about basically anything, like abortion or anything else for that matter. So that I don't think it's all that relevant. So I don't know why Patrick thinks this is the case, but again, look at the framing, that these are somehow nuclear options. I don't agree. This is like anti-realist views are my sort of default starting point. There's nothing nuclear about them. I don't think I'm giving up anything of value. I deny the realist conception of value. I think their view of value is really implausible and bizarre, and I don't think I have no use for it. And so I don't think I'm giving something up any more than someone that doesn't believe in, ghosts is giving something up and saying, I don't think ghosts exist. Or if you don't believe in Bigfoot or alien abduction, what are you giving up? Is it a nuclear option to deny those things? Moral realism is less plausible to me than the existence of Bigfoot or ghosts. So I don't think I'm giving anything up by denying it. And I think it's just as useless of an idea. And I mean that. So I think it's useless and cost to rejecting it. So again, the reason I emphasize this so much is because the framing in meta-ethical disputes is there's these arguments in favor of realism, but maybe anti-realism is true. But if it is true, it's got to pay a pretty heavy cost. You don't get to say things are wrong, or they can only be wrong in an arbitrary way, and that's a cost. There's no cost. If there's a cost, if you think there's a cost, you let me know in the comments what you think the cost is, because all of the kinds of costs realists try to tell me that there are to me, they always sound super like, I just don't think they're costs. I think what they say tends to be false, or it doesn't strike me as a cost. So I just don't buy that. And I don't know why anti-realists have been so reluctant to reject the framing of these debates. I don't even like why are we anti-realists? I think morality is real. And so, one thing I could say is, look, I study moral psychology. I've studied morality for years now. I think morality is real, but I don't think it's, on my view, the non-naturalist conception of irreducible normativity is tantamount to magic. It's super implausible, and I don't buy it for a second. I'm not even tempted to buy it. It's to me equally as absurd as if someone said consciousness is magical. It's just magical. I don't buy it at all. Now, I could be wrong about that, but yeah, I don't buy the non-naturalist view of morality at all. I think it's one of the most profoundly implausible things anyone's ever told me about anything. That's how implausible I find it. I'm not even remotely tempted by it. Okay, so given that, so now we're looking at this issue, and I'm supposed to take it as like this serious contender view, and it's a nuclear option where I have to pay a heavy cost if I don't want to accept it. Why should I grant that? I don't grant that either. And yet the debate treats it like I have to. I'm permitted to be an anti-realist as long as I acknowledge the big costs I'm paying and doing. I'm denying this, I'm denying the common sense view. Well, I don't agree. I don't think realism is the common sense view. I'm denying this thing that has this. It's like if I deny it, I don't get to say certain things. So realists will say, well, if you deny realism is true, you can't say murder's wrong. Watch this. Look, I'm an anti-realist, right? And I've been told I can't say murder's wrong. Watch. Murder is wrong. Look, I can say it. Holy shit. And I'm not lying. I do think murder is wrong. I really think that. I just don't think murder is magically wrong. So I don't think wrongness is magical. And that might sound like a disparaging and uncharitable way of framing things, but do keep in mind, one, I don't typically say, yeah, realists believe in magic. What I try to make clear is, to me, the view is so implausible, it seems like someone telling me that there's magic. I don't think realists think of their views as magic. If they do think of their views as magic, that's their prerogative, but I don't think that they do. I think that they think that non-natural moral facts are a perfectly methodologically, epistemically, metaphysically, totally legitimate, sensible thing. It might even be an obvious thing that it doesn't have huge philosophical problems. Maybe it faces some sorry, I keep saying meta. Maybe it faces some philosophical challenges, but the realists can overcome them, and it's a rational, sensible worldview. In fact, it's the most rational, sensible worldview. It doesn't require all of the negative connotations associated with magic. It doesn't have those implausible. It doesn't have any sort of prima facie implausibility. Lance is the one that's on the wrong end of this. That's how I think realists think about it. So I don't think that they are obligated to take my framing of the issue. I don't think they think of it as magical. So fair enough. But since it seems that way to me, I'm not obligated to see the dialectic the way that realists do. In other words, it's not just that I disagree with realists. I also disagree with how they see the debate. And I'm not required to share the rest of their views about the debate. I don't have to think, for instance, that realism is the common sense view. Anti-realism is this hyper-revisionary, non-commonsensical view that's really counterintuitive, that could be true, but it could be true only if one grants that it's not commonsensical and that it's really, really counterintuitive. I don't have to grant that. And in fact, I don't grant that. I don't find it counterintuitive. I don't share their intuitions. Like the realists that find it counterintuitive, I don't share their intuitions. I'm not obligated to, and I don't. And I don't think it carries big practical costs. And I don't think it is it's not that I think anti-realism is the commonsensical view. I don't. I just also don't think realism is the commonsensical view. And so I don't think that there's this presumption in favor of realism. And I rarely see anti-realists push back on this. Some do. Neil Sinclair has a paper arguing against the idea that there's a presumption in favor of realism. So there are people out there that do make those sorts of arguments. Okay. So I said a lot there, but I don't like this framing of anti-realism. I think that the framing itself is kind of flawed. Anyway, so the point I was going to get to is I do think morality is real. I just don't think it has the characteristics non-naturalist realists do. And I don't think I'm obligated to say that morality would only be real were it to have those characteristics. So, in a certain sense, I think their view of morality is only real if it has non-natural properties. Well, I don't think it has non-natural properties. So in that respect, it's not real. And so technically speaking, I don't think, insofar as morality refers to what non-naturalist realists believe in, I don't think morality is real. But I do think it's real given what I believe in. And so given what I believe in, it is real. And given what they believe in, it's not real. So from my point of view, I say that I am a moral realist because I think morality is real. And because they think morality has these properties it doesn't have, that it's not real. So I'm a real moral realist and they're a fake moral realist. Why don't we frame the discussion that way? Why don't we frame it that way? So I'm a moral realist. They're moral, what? Magicalists, moral mystics. I could call them stuff like that. And how come there's nobody in the chat anymore? I haven't seen anybody say anything for 10 or 15 minutes. There were people chatting before, whatever. Anyway, so from my point of view, there would be I would be just as in a position to frame the debate as I'm a moral realist and they're moral, I don't know, fakers or something. They don't believe that, or we could call I'm a real moral realist and they're fake moral realists. How about that? I think I've used that terminology before, but not on here. So I'm a real moral realist. They're fake moral realists. Is that an appropriate framing? I mean, if I did that, people would say that's a very uncharitable framing. Oh, okay. So saying I don't believe in morality is not uncharitable. So, I mean, this is really weird. These framings matter. They matter because when people from outside the field hear stuff like moral anti-realist, it sounds bad. I don't want to be that. And realist, sounds good. I do want to be that. I got a comment on why someone said if you're gardening, you don't have to stop to tell me that you're there, but I appreciate it. Jim Cummins says, I'm gardening while listening to you. Cool. Bob Leach says, I agree. I don't know what the latter part means, but if you're agreeing with me, cool. If you're not agreeing with me, not cool, but you could say it anyway. You're allowed. But yeah, there is this weird thing where people will say, if you're an anti-realist, you can't say murder is wrong. Yes, you can if you're an anti-realist. There's nothing stopping you from saying it. Now, of course, that's not charitable. They don't mean you literally can't say the words. They mean that if you were to say the words, it wouldn't be consistent with being an anti-realist. Yes, it would be. So the charitable framing is not going to help them. Yeah, it's consistent with being an anti-realist to say things are wrong. That's nonsense. It's just nonsense, and it's not true. And I think realists ought to know better. Um, so, like, yes, we could say stuff is wrong. There's nothing stopping us from doing it. We don't have to think what they think when we say it. Okay, so Paul says, would you say that you personally use moral language in an appraiser relativist way? Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I pretty much speak like a relativist, but I don't say that I am a relativist. Or, I mean, I really kind of speak like a combination of relativist and expressivist, because maybe not all the time I'm intending to report my attitudes. I might be just expressing myself. So, yeah, I tend to speak in an appraiser relativist expressivist combination. I don't know exactly what I'm doing in any particular context. So, yes, but I don't endorse those views because I typically take those views as they're traditionally described in the metaethics literature to be semantic theses about the meaning of moral claims, and I don't endorse the view that moral claims are relativistic or expressivistic. It's just because I use the language that way doesn't mean I think everybody does, or that the words have like moral sentences have some kind of intrinsic meaning that comports with appraiser relativism. Cloud of Time says, today I learned I'm a real moral realist. Yeah, we're real moral realists. They're fake moral realists. Why don't we just, I mean, look, if I went out saying that, nobody's going to take up that usage or take it very seriously. But I think it does rhetorically make the point that there's a deeply unfair framing of the dispute between realists and anti-realists. It's kind of a shitty framing. Jim Cummins says, do you think that at some point anti-realists would rebrand or relabel but keep the same view? I doubt it. I don't know. Yeah, or has that ship sailed? Yeah, it's probably sailed. Okay, what else from my coverage of the Patrick Flynn discussion? Second. Okay. So next, Patrick says this. Next, Patrick says, let me get it up on the screen. Again, anti-realism is precluding the possibility of true or false moral judgment altogether. No, it's not. So some anti-realists are going to be cognitivists, so relativists, ideal observer theory, constructivists. They're all going to think. So again, look at the quote. Anti-realism is precluding the possibility of true or false moral judgment altogether. That's just not true. Patrick, so an error theorist might agree with this and an expressivist might agree with this, but I'm not an error theorist or an expressivist. A relativist, a constructivist, an ideal observer theory, like someone that endorses a relation designating account, none of them are going to agree with this because they all endorse cognitivist accounts. They all think that there are true or false moral judgments. There's also possibly going to be some expressivists that endorse deflationary theories of truth, quasi-realists. So there are a whole bunch of anti-realist positions where it doesn't preclude the possibility of true or false moral judgment. That's just not true. Now, if Patrick means or intended to mean like true or false in a realist sense, well, that's true, but that's trivially true. So, I mean, it'd be like saying, hey, the position which is defined by stipulation is the view according to which there are no stance-independent moral facts doesn't hold that there are stance-independent moral facts. I mean, it's just, for the statement to be true, it'd have to be pretty trivial, unless you're trying to imply there's something bad about that, but then there's something bad about the definition. Like, if you're going to say there's something wrong with that, or okay, then just tell us what's wrong with it. So not much more to say about that. That just doesn't seem accurate. Next quote from Patrick. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Getting the quoted here. I want you to be able to see what I'm responding to. So here's the next quote from Patrick. One must not miss the radicality of such a view that is not the majority position among philosophers, as most philosophers, particularly ethicists, are moral realists. And then Patrick goes on to say this is an appeal to authority, obviously, but appeals to authority have weight, even if not overwhelming amount. So I do agree with the latter part. I don't have a problem with someone appealing to authority. Sometimes you get like internet debaters that are like, appeal to authority, so it's fallacious. That's nonsense. That those sorts of goofy lists of fallacies. Appealing to an authority is not a fallacy. You can insist someone's an authority that's not, and that's going to be a problem. Like if I say my uncle Steve says there stands independent moral facts, Steve is an expert, so there are. And you go, who's Steve? My uncle, therefore an expert. Like that's ridiculous. And no one is obliged to take that seriously. But this is a case where philosophers are purported to be experts. I mean, we could question that. Are there experts? Are they experts? Experts at what? Uh, experts at being correct about philosophical arguments? I don't know about that. I mean, one irony of that is that most of these philosophers are also atheists, and Patrick is a Christian. So some weight there. I mean, it's not really an irony. I think Patrick would just grant it's some evidence. It's just not decisive, and there's better arguments for theism and so on. In any case, I have addressed this quite a lot. So I don't think a view is radical because it happens to be a view that's not endorsed by the majority of current analytic philosophers. Anti-realism seems likely to have been the dominant view until maybe the 1970s or 80s within the Western philosophy, or at least analytic philosophy. In fact, if anything, I think it's still more popular among continental philosophers. I'd love to see a survey on that. In fact, we could probably zoom in on just continental philosophers that responded to the Phil paper survey. I don't feel like doing it right now. But yeah, it's 62% endorse. So, I mean, keep in mind how misleading that is. So first of all, that 62% is really, 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 really misleading. About half of them, is slightly more than half, are moral naturalists who think moral facts are reducible to certain kinds of natural facts. And the other, about half, it's a little less than half, are non-naturalists. So really, there's three positions here: naturalist realism, non-naturalist realism, and anti-realism. I forget what anti-realism is. And if you look, it's 26.1%, I think, are anti-realists, and then it's like 26.6% are non-naturalist realists, which is probably the view that Patrick endorses. So they're almost identical in the overall proportion that endorse these views. They're not really that different if we exclude naturalists, and it's not clear we should exclude them, because if you think that moral facts are natural facts, you don't have irreducible normativity and all this stuff that, or at least it'd be much harder to get it. And you probably don't have it, or don't even think you have it. So it's kind of misleading, and it's by no means clear that there's some sort of majority view. It actually looks like we got about a third, a quarter endorse one view, a third, a quarter endorse another view, a third, a quarter endorse another view, and then you got like 14-50% of people that are like they're somewhere else in this framework. There's no consensus here. It's kind of silly that people keep citing that 62%. Also, 62% is not that much more than 50%. I mean, is that some devastating, which is not 98%? So is there something radical about endorsing a view that's not endorsed by 62% of philosophers? Why? And are you a radical if you're a naturalist rather than a non-naturalist? Are you radical if you're a non-naturalist instead of a naturalist? Like what? There's like, if you just looked at naturalists versus non-naturalists, it's not going to be that different from 62 versus everybody else anyway. So are non-naturalists radical because the naturalists are more common? This is a weird way of framing things, to take one survey question that aggregates two very, very different metaethical positions, which is moral naturalist realism and non-naturalist realism, and then says if you don't endorse one of the two, you have a radical position, even though when you split the two up, both are about equivalent to the anti-realist view. This is silly. This is silly. There's no majority view here. This is just, it's goofy. People need to stop doing this. And in any case, why should we defer to a survey of analytic, like what a survey tells us about what most analytic philosophers think? They think lots of things about lots of things. I don't take, anyway, if you think I'm being dismissive here, I have my longest blog series is actually addressing this. It's called the Phil Papers Fallacy. It's a 9-part blog series where I go into a whole bunch of detail about how we shouldn't put that much stock into what philosophers think. So I will link that too. I should just go back, listen to this, and put links for everything in the description of the video. Let me get to the last one, that series, and then I'll post it here. Yeah, it's here. So it's a like super long, like essay length discussion about why we shouldn't put that much stock in what the majority of analytic philosophers think. So I pin that. So that's on the Phil Papers Fallacy. So I think that it just doesn't, a view isn't radical because it's not endorsed by 62% of philosophers. I think that's pretty questionable framing of the issue. So The next comment's not worth getting into. Here's one that's worth getting into. So here's a very brief comment. Oh, looks like a couple people said stuff in the chat. Let me have a look. Jim Cummins asks, do you think the practice of apologetics leads to a further doubling down on moral realism because they see it as required for their views? Are there moral anti-realists who are theists? Yes, there are moral anti-realists who are theists. If you look at the Phil Paper survey, let's just look at the Phil Paper survey one. I believe it's about 15% of the theists that responded to the survey also endorsed anti-realism, but we're going to look right now. Let's go to realism. Whoop. Metaethics, moral realism, and anti-realism. Oh, right. In case you're interested in seeing the results of the survey, whoop, let me refresh. I'll post a link to it. I will post a link to the 2020 Phil Paper survey in the chat. Check it out. It's very interesting to go through here and see what philosophers think about these things. Do check out the demographic information so you can see who the respondents to the survey are. And there's also kind of a report describing some concerns and stuff with how the data was gathered, that sort of thing. Okay. Now, once you open that up and you look at the proportion that endorse realism, you could go down and look at several boxes that sort of cross-reference responses to the realism, anti-realism question with the responses to other questions. So you could see the correlation between how people responded to the meta-ethical question and the responses to other questions. And I'm going to go down to, let's see where it's at. I'm looking for theism in here. Maybe I have to Control F and search for it. Okay, theism. Yeah, I found it. It's a ways down. Yeah, it is a ways down. Okay, so we have, out of those that are theists that accept, what is it? Moral realism, God theism, accept, reject. Okay. Right. So you have, out of those that are theists, 279 accept realism and 38 reject realism. So let's see, what's the percentage for that? 279, it's 38, got 317. So we should do 38 out of 317, right? And we get 12%. So 12% of the theists are anti-realists. So yeah, are some theists anti-realists? Yes. Is it a huge number? No. But, you know, if it was 26% in general and 12% for theists, it's not, I mean, we're not talking this like, yeah, some of them are anti-realists. So if we go back to the question, do you think the practice of apologetics leads to doubling down on moral realism because they see it as required? Yeah, I think so. And I think it's not required. So it's weird, especially because I think moral realism is less plausible. They want to tie the theistic position to an even less plausible position, moral realism. Jonas Jensen says, I sometimes think it'd be more accurate to lump together naturalist and realist than naturalists and NNS. It seems that naturalists and ARs agree, except on semantics. Do you mean naturalists and anti-realists? So in other words, are you saying that you think it makes more sense to put naturalist realists and anti-realists together in contrast to non-naturalist realists? That would make sense of this remark. It seems that naturalists and anti-realists agree, except on semantics. Yeah. So, well, I mean, error theorists and naturalists would agree on semantics too. I mean, they might even agree on like, do they disagree on metaphysics? Like what? Yeah. Oh, wait, no, never mind. Hold up. Do error theorists think that the error is like not just a presumption of realism, but a presumption of non-naturalist realism? I don't know. I actually don't know. Huh. have to go back and look at what Mackey says and how other error theorists have characterized things. I'm not entirely sure. But if that's the suggestion that naturalists and anti-realists actually have some affinities, like they share the same view of what the world is like, they just disagree on how to talk about it, I'm roughly on board with that characterization. And that's why I think that saying there's more realists and anti-realists is a bit weird and misleading. I also just think it doesn't matter very much, and the number isn't so overwhelming that it should be like a super concern for anybody anyway. So 62% is not very impressive, even if it was all non-naturalist realists. Yeah, Jonas Jensen says, yes, have them switch. Yeah, no problem. I figured because it made sense of the context. So yeah, I think that it might actually make sense to put naturalists and anti-realists together, depending on what dispute you have in mind. Oh, closing the window by accident. I don't know why. I keep accidentally closing the Phil Papers survey. Okay, so let's get back over to the Patrick Flynn review. Oh, right. Here's the next thing that Patrick Flynn says. Epistemic norms cannot go. So I'm a normative anti-realist, which means that I don't just reject moral realism, I reject epistemic realism. So some people will respond by saying, how can you do anything without epistemic norms? Hold up. I never said I don't have epistemic norms. Do they think I don't have procedures for forming beliefs about things? This is ridiculous. This is that same problem again, where people are mixing up that you don't believe in objective or stance independent epistemic norms, but you don't have epistemic norms at all. I think there are epistemic norms. Like clearly there's norms in how to form beliefs. I just don't think that they require irreducible normativity. Why would they require? I haven't heard a good argument for why they require that. I haven't even heard a good explanation of what the hell irreducible normativity is. I don't think things require not incomprehensible nonsense. Again, you have this thing where it's like, okay, you have to endorse my account of epistemic norms, or you don't think there are epistemic norms. No, I don't think epistemic norms are stance independent. It doesn't mean I don't think there's epistemic norms. So this is just wrong. Epistemic anti-realism does not hold that there's no epistemic norms or that epistemic norms must go. It holds that epistemic norms, there are no, it holds that there are no stance independent epistemic norms. There can be stance dependent epistemic norms. You can have whatever view you want about epistemic norms as long as you don't think they're stance independent. That's all anti-realism is committed to. Doesn't mean you don't have epistemic norms. I don't know why people frame it this way. Even Terence Cuneo, when using like a formalization of the companions and guilt argument, will actually just drop stance independent and we'll just say, yeah, like the other view holds that there's no epistemic norms. Not true. If Cuneo wants to update that and say they hold that there's no stance independent norms, absolutely that should be done, because the alternative is super misleading and implies, it's like saying, if you're a moral anti-realist, then you don't believe anything is morally right or wrong in any respect. That is not true. It's implying we don't have normative moral standards. And it's not true. Why do people insist on doing this? Why do they insist on misframing things to imply that anti-realists don't have the views that they have? Why? You don't have to misframe our position. And one has to wonder, when they're so persistent about it, why they're so persistent about it. Why do people have to mischaracterize anti-realist positions like aggressively, persistently, all the time, every day? Why? Why do they do it? I don't get why they do it. So here we have this remark. Get worked up about it because it's ridiculous. Stop being so sloppy. Epistemic anti-realism is not the view that there are no epistemic norms. Maybe that would be epistemic error theory, but it's not epistemic anti-realism. Those are different things. Be specific. Be clear. If you want to say epistemic error theorists who hold that all epistemic claims are claims about stance-independent epistemic facts, there are no such claims, so all epistemic claims are false. Fine. Say that. But do not say that epistemic anti-realism, it says epistemic norms have to go. It doesn't say that. What if you're an epistemic relativist and you think there are epistemic norms? What if you're an epistemic constructivist? You just don't think there are norms? You could say, hey, I'm a constructivist. I think that we construct the epistemic norms, which totally exist and are constructed. And then someone goes, oh, so you don't think there are epistemic norms? They have to go. No, I didn't say that. I think we construct them. Like, do you look? I'm a constructivist about money. I don't think things have intrinsic. Like, I don't think there's the natural facts. There's like facts about protons and the periodic table, and then facts about how much $5 bill is worth. It's constructed fact. Does that, if you're a constructivist about money, does it mean you don't believe in money? I'm a constructivist about sports. I don't think we discover sports. I think we invent them. So does that mean I think baseball doesn't exist? That would be ridiculous. Why do philosophers not make the distinction between thinking baseball is invented and thinking baseball exists? Like, why conflate these things? It's weird. It's weird. I just, ugh. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. How do people keep doing this? How do they keep screwing up this badly? How? You tell me how in the chat. How do you not understand the difference between people like this was created by a culture and this doesn't exist? Why would you think that those mean the same thing? Or why, if you say, no, I'm not saying that. Yeah, I mean realist epistemic norms. Then why didn't you say that? Why not say that? Why not be precise? So which is it? Are you super sloppy and imprecise with how you frame your position? Or are you just mischaracterizing alternative views? It's one or the other. It's one or the other. Either you're misframing their views, or you are not being precise enough with your language in a way that's super misleading and clearly and constantly confuses the shit out of audiences. So which one are you going with? You are so imprecise, you confuse the shit out of your audience and actively mislead them into thinking false things? Or are you mischaracterizing the view and actively misleading people into thinking false things? Pick one, because it's lose-lose either way. So yeah, I'm tired of this shit of people mischaracterizing anti-realist positions. Stop doing it, realists. I mean, aren't you the ones that think that there's objective moral facts? Don't you think you have an objective moral responsibility not to mischaracterize other people's views and be super uncharitable? Why don't you live by your standards? Why don't I say, hey, they say that we anti-realists act like realists when we care about things. Okay, well, when you act like you don't care about things, does that mean that you're acting like an anti-realist? Huh. So is it that we anti-realists, we act like realists because we don't, or at least I don't. I could say I can't speak for other anti-realists. Maybe they're a bunch of baby murdering maniacs. But they're not. I'm being hyperbolic and making fun of and parodying what realists will say about us. I don't think that. I'm just saying that in case like YouTube is like, what? Whatever. People say way worse things. And I'm clearly being hyperbolic and mocking a view that I don't hold. Anyway, so man, that made me lose my train of thought. Right. So realists will routinely say stuff like, well, moral anti-realists will get really like morally motivated and they'll live by really consistently with this moral standard and they'll be really adamant about a moral view. And that seems to hint at like maybe they do think that there's these moral facts. Okay, well, when moral realists routinely mischaracterize, misframe, and get super duper sloppy and bad at describing anti-realist views, they raise terrible objections. They constantly imply that we're evil and stupid and bad all the time, including professional philosophers do this. So they're not living consistently with what on paper are their moral principles. So if you act consistently and like you're really committed to a particular set of moral values and you do act in accordance with them, if that implies you're a realist, then does failing to do so imply you're an anti-realist? Because then we get this really weird situation where I'm supposedly not really an anti-realist because I act like a realist. Okay, so are they really anti-realists because they fail to act like realists? Okay, so there is a solution here. Stop mischaracterizing our views. Stop doing it. And stop being super bad at framing the way that you describe things. I'm tired of, look, I'm not trying to be rude here. I'm not trying to insult people that say these sorts of things, but it's constant. It's like every like day or like maybe there's like 1 or 2 days out of the week where someone doesn't mischaracterize my views or anti-realists, maybe, but probably not. So I've spent like my waking hours when I'm not working dealing with constant mischaracterizations, insinuation, hypocrites that don't live consistently with their values. It never stops all day long. And then we're told because we care morally about stuff, we can't be anti-realists. We're actually acting like realists. Okay, well then stop acting like, of course I don't actually literally mean this. Stop acting like anti-realists by doing immoral stuff like negligently mischaracterizing our views all the time. How about that? Fair trade? No? Yeah. no one's going to go in for that. So ridiculous. Okay. Here's another quote from Patrick. First, one should show that arguments for moral anti-realism are either seriously weak or beg the metaphysical question in favor of scientific naturalism. Big mistake here. Just a big mistake. Okay. And again, I have nothing against you personally, Patrick. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you, but one should show that arguments for moral anti-realism are either seriously weak or beg the metaphysical. So seriously weak. Okay, that's fine. Like maybe the arguments for anti-realism are seriously weak. Or beg the metaphysical question in favor of scientific naturalism. Well, what if you're not a scientific naturalist? I don't think you like which anti-realist view requires scientific naturalism. I don't endorse scientific naturalism, but I'm not presuming any particular metaphysical view. You don't have to presume any particular view about natural. Like you don't have to think naturalism is true to reject non-naturalist accounts of moral realism. You just don't. You just don't. You could be a non-naturalist and think non-naturalist realism is false or unintelligible. No inconsistency there. Like you could literally believe in all sorts of, you could be a mathematical Platonist, you could believe in ghosts and pixies, and then just say, yeah, but the non-naturalist realist stuff, that's wrong. No inconsistency. So yeah, you don't have to be a naturalist. So that's weird. I mean, maybe that's intended specifically to be a response to Destiny. I don't recall Destiny in the discussion saying he's a scientific naturalist though. But a lot of times Christians and Christian apologists will move from like if you're an atheist or you're maybe in this case an anti-realist to like you're a naturalist, and that's a contingent association. There's no logical entailment that if you're an atheist you're a naturalist, or if you're an anti-realist you're a naturalist. You don't have to be. So whatever. I'm not going to get into saying, oh well, I know this person that's not a naturalist, but yeah, I know people that do philosophy professionally. Plenty of them are both atheists and they're not naturalists. In fact, I probably know more non-naturalists than naturalists. So here's another remark. Oh, did I show the previous remark? I think I did. Here is another remark from Patrick. From there, one might propose something like phenomenal conservatism as our epistemological launchpad. Okay, let's say we do that. So from there, one might propose something like phenomenal conservatism as our epistemological launchpad. Let's say we do that. Okay, so phenomenal conservatism, you have prima facie justification for believing that things are the way they seem in the absence of defeaters. That's the view. Okay, well, seems to me that realism is false and anti-realism is true. Done. Like this is a two-way street. Doesn't seem to me that realism is true. Seems like it's false. In fact, it seems pretty ridiculous to me. So there we go. I know some realists are going to bristle at that, and he's saying the view is ridiculous. I don't mean that the view isn't worth taking seriously in an academic context. It's not worth writing about. That realists shouldn't be treated with respect by anti-realists. I don't want anybody to be disrespectful or obnoxious or rude to one another personally. It's just that I think certain views are ridiculous given my views. Like I think the view is super implausible. It's nothing to do with how seriously to take it. So I know people don't like that language, but do keep in mind that some of the people that would bristle at me saying that realism is ridiculous would, at least some of those people, would be perfectly fine implying that I have questionable normative attitudes. Like maybe I'm okay with people, like I don't even want to mention the kind of examples that they use. Like Atlantis can't say this, and of course people say really critical things about me. So look, I'm not trying to be critical of anybody in particular. I'm trying to express the epistemic status that I think realism enjoys given my views, which is that it's profoundly implausible. So if you don't like the term ridiculous, fine. Let's go with profoundly implausible given my views, conditional on my views. Is that a problem? I don't see why it would be. So yeah, phenomenal conservatism is not going to help realists because the rest of it, like, okay, so its private justification seems true to you. Great. Doesn't seem true to me. Okay, so then Patrick says this. There are, of course, other moves one can make. See the two linked books along with my post on moral relativism, but let me finish with the note that it is not illegitimate to tease out the consequences of the moral anti-realist position, consequences that will strike most everyday audience members as absurd. Okay, so I agree with the first part of this. It's not illegitimate to tease out the consequences of the moral anti-realist position. I agree. What I don't agree with is the second part, consequences that will strike most everyday audience members as absurd. Consequences. I don't think there are absurd consequences. So I would like to know what they are. So then we have this remark. Again, this is from Patrick. I keep repeating that in case someone comes into the stream or joins at some later point. For the anti-realist, this means making it clear that there is no moral fact of the matter about so many things where the majority of people believe there is definitely some moral fact of the matter. There's two mistakes here. One, for the anti-realist, this means making it clear that there's no moral fact of the matter about so many things. Okay. And it goes on. Anti-realists don't have to think that there's no moral fact of the matter. They can believe in moral facts of the matter. They just don't believe that those facts are stance independently true. That's it. It doesn't entail that you don't think there's moral facts. Second, where the majority of people believe there's definitely some moral fact of the matter. Now, if this is a question of whether people think there's a fact of the matter in some respect consistent with realism and anti-realism, then this isn't going to be a problem for the anti-realists, because they would just say it's not true that I don't think that there's some fact of the matter. I do think there's facts of the matter consistent with an anti-realist perspective. If, on the other hand, this means that by fact of the matter, Patrick means something like a stance independent fact of the matter, I mean, one, why not say that? Again, why not just be clear? Why not just be clear? And two, if this is intended to mean stance independent facts, then you have this claim here. If you add in, like in brackets, stance independent, the majority of people believe there's definitely some moral fact of the matter. So if this means there's definitely some stance independent fact of the matter, okay, so that's an empirical claim. The majority of people believe, citation needed. Majority of people believe that there's a stance independent fact of the matter. I mean, first, the statement's ambiguous. I don't know what kind of facts of the matter we're talking about. But if it's intended to be facts that are only facts like in a realist sense, I don't think the majority of people take a realist stance towards pretty much anything. So why do I say pretty much? I don't think most people are realists. So I would think the statement is empirically false, if that's what it means, but it's ambiguous. So it's both ambiguous. It's almost impossible to interpret because it doesn't make the presuppositions clear. But if it is presupposing, we could go through it this way. It's ambiguous. If you resolve the ambiguity in a way where it's consistent with anti-realism, then it's not going to be a problem for the anti-realists. They're not going to say the majority of people don't think this, because they could just say they do. It's consistent with anti-realism, not a problem. If the majority thinks of it in a realist way, then it could just be false. That's the case. So this is not a win for realists unless they, in other words, in order for the claim to be substantive and true, it would have to both be the case that this is intended to mean stance independent fact of the matter, and there would have to be empirical evidence supporting the view that most people take a realist stance towards the issue in question. There isn't good empirical evidence to support the claim that most people are realists about any particular issue. So here we have someone making empirical claims about human psychology and not supporting those claims with appropriate degree of empirical evidence. Then we have this. Oh, I end up saying a lot about this. Give me a second. Yeah, I'll come back to this one. I'm going to take a quick break again, and I'm just going to keep going. Why not? All right, I am back. Okay, so let's continue with the next remark from Patrick. Yeah, I don't even want to quote it, but I don't like when people get normative examples that I think are really bad, like just really awful activities. I don't like to discuss them. But what Patrick says is basically, again, it is often worthwhile to have the anti-realist quote go on the record about these things, since if they want to be consistent with their position, they will have to say what no human person should ever want to say concerning matters of, and then it goes on to describe the worst things that people like, so the worst things that people could do. And you could have a look at the quote. It's so basically the idea here is, hey, when you're talking to anti-realists, it's good to get them on the record saying stuff. And I tend to use this example, kind of because it's just over the top, and people use it in the literature sometimes. But so in fact, let's read it with that context in mind, where you could substitute out the moral issue for this one. Again, it's often worthwhile to have the anti-realist go on the record about these things, since if they want to be consistent with their position, they will have to say what no human person should ever want to say concerning matters of, like, torturing babies or something like that. In other words, the anti-realist would have to say stuff like, it's not wrong to torture babies. It's not objectively wrong to torture babies, that sort of thing. And you have to, the idea is you got to get the anti-realist to say that, because look what they're saying. Ooh, they're saying it's not wrong to torture babies. Look at that fucking monster, look at that monster. You got them. They said it's not wrong to torture babies. Now, this is bullshit, and it's the bullshit at the heart of the realist anti-realist dispute. I'm going to be again, I'm done being super friendly about this, because this kind of thing, yeah, you got to get them to go on the record, make them say a thing, right? This is what they're doing. In fact, I'll just read through it, because this it bothers me, because it moves into the degree of being nasty and uncharitable to the anti-realist, because you're not just saying that the anti-realist is wrong. You're implying the anti-realist is like an awful person. Imagine if you did this. In fact, let me read through this, and then I'll, just keep in mind, just imagine people doing this in any other philosophical dispute. Like if you said, yeah, people that endorse a theory of time torture babies, and they don't care about slaughtering millions of people. They wouldn't care at all. They're evil. Like imagine you did, oh, you don't endorse reliabilism and epistemology? Yeah, well, you probably just kidnap people and eat them. Yeah, maybe you're a cannibal. You might be a cannibal if you don't endorse my view about epistemology. It's farcical how people describe anti-realism, as if we are if you're an anti-realist, all you think is that moral standards don't have metaphysical mumbo jumbo involved with them. It doesn't have anything to do with your attitudes towards people, or how you act, or how you treat people. And a moral anti-realist and a realist, if you were looking at them doing things, they could do exactly the same shit. They could go out and try to save people and be a good person and donate to charity. They're not anti-realism is not psychopathy. It's not being totally without empathy for other people. It's not caring. It's not being manipulative. It's not thinking it's totally fine for you to just be a total piece of garbage. That is not what anti-realism is. It's rejecting a particular metaphysical view about the nature of moral truth. That's it. You could still have views about moral truth or morality or whatever, and it has nothing to do about your attitudes or your character or your behavior or how you treat people. It has none of these practical implications. None of them. And I'm so tired of anti-realistic, well, but you can't say murder is wrong. No, this goes right back to the same thing I talked about, an hour, 2 hours ago? Okay. If you want to say that murder is wrong, you have to agree that it's magically wrong. And so, do you believe in magic? No? Well, then you can't say murder is wrong. You can't say it. You can't say murder is wrong because you don't believe it's magical, and it is magical, so you can't say it's wrong. Because to say murder is wrong just is to say murder is magically wrong. But you don't think it's magical, so you can't say it's wrong. Now, that would be fine if someone said, yeah, you don't think murder is magically wrong. You don't think it's magically wrong. Yeah, I don't think murder is magically wrong. I don't think murder is magically wrong. Does that tell you if I'm okay with murder or not? No, it just means I don't think murder is magically wrong. Doesn't tell you if I'm anti-murder. I am anti-murder. Murder's bad. It's just not that badness isn't magical. I don't have to think badness is magical in order to think things are bad. And like the analogies here, it's not like I'm not like going like, look at Fermat's last theorem and look at this theoretical physics on like I have like a chalkboard 10 miles wide and I'm like doing all these equations and I'm like, see, so anti-realists can get out of this crap. No, it's trivially easy to give examples of where this clearly doesn't apply. Food, right? So your gastronomic realism is a parody. It's like a satirical version of realism, right? So the gastronomic realist would say that there are facts about what food and drink is good or bad, independent of your evaluative attitudes, your reaction to it, how it tastes to you. So like caviar is good, whether you like the taste of it or not. Red wine is delicious, whether you like it or you could say, oh, it's bitter, it's nasty, I don't like it at all. You're incorrect. You ought to drink wine, not because it tastes good, not because it's healthy, not because for ethical reasons. No, independent, set aside all the ethical considerations, cost considerations, nutrition considerations. It's nothing to do with any of that. Just in virtue of its pure, sui generis, intrinsic gastronomic properties, some foods are intrinsically better than other foods, gastronomically better. And you ought, therefore, to eat those foods independent of how they taste to you. Set aside, like maybe if you're allergic, that's okay, but that's for like practical, like prudential norms, which can override the gastronomic norms. But all else being equal, you ought to eat the intrinsically good foods instead of the intrinsically bad foods. This is a ridiculous view. It's like super ridiculous. Now, I reject that view. I bet you do too. Now, given that presumptive, now if you're a gastronomic realist, fine, let's have a conversation about that. But assuming you're not, now imagine you go to a restaurant, you want to buy some food, and or buy some food, like you're grocery shopping. You go to a restaurant, you want to order some food. So you want to order the soup instead of the salad, right? You order some dish, comes with a super salad, and you say, I'll get the soup, so mushroom soup. And the waiter says, I'm very sorry, but that's the incorrect choice. There's a correct choice, and it's the salad. That'd be really weird. But imagine someone saying you can't prefer the soup. You can't say the soup is better than the salad. So, let's say you order the soup. So the waiter's like, oh, you order this, but the soup doesn't have as good of gastronomic properties as the salad. It's a great salad. What are you doing? But they give you the soup anyway, right? They're kind enough. And then you eat the soup and you say, wow, this is excellent. And they say, incorrect. It's not excellent. That would be really weird. So think of the realist discourse there, how bizarre that would be in the first place. But now imagine someone saying that if you don't endorse gastronomic realism, then you can't say that the food you're eating is good or bad at all. It doesn't matter whether you order the soup or the salad or anything, because you're not a gastronomic realist. So you don't accept salad is better than the soup. But if you started saying, oh, this is delicious, and someone goes, wrong, you can't say that. You can't say food is delicious, because the only sense in which food could be delicious is if it was delicious independent of how it tasted to you. But you actually think that the food just tastes good to you. But whether the food is delicious or not intrinsically has nothing to do with how it tastes to you. That's irrelevant. And since you think that there's nothing is good in that sense, nothing is delicious objectively, you can't say things are delicious. You can't say it. For one, yes, you can. You could say it's delicious. You could say, I don't give a shit about your gastronomic realism. I'm going to say it's delicious in a dependent way. You can say that, but it's revisionary. You're revising language. You're just speaking in a proprietary way. You don't think it's genuinely delicious. You don't think it's really tasty. If you're a gastronomic anti-realist, you can't think food actually tastes good. You can't. It's impossible. You can't think it actually tastes good. So if you think things taste good and you're not a gastronomic realist, you're wrong. You could think it's good, but it's not really good. It's fake goodness. It's arbitrary. Your food preferences are arbitrary. Why do you think about it, whether you prefer vanilla or chocolate ice cream? Whichever one you prefer, it's arbitrary. What's your justification for preferring chocolate over vanilla? What's your justification? Let me know in the chat what your justification is for preferring chocolate over vanilla or vice versa. If you can't give me an argument as to why chocolate is objectively better than vanilla or vice versa, you're not justified in ordering chocolate instead of vanilla or vice versa. You're not justified. You must be indifferent. You can't care. And if you say, yeah, well, I don't have to be indifferent. I like the taste of one better. Shut up. That's irrelevant. It's irrelevant how it tastes to you. It doesn't matter what your preferences are. What matters are the intrinsic gastronomic properties of the food. It's the only thing that matters. And if you don't care about that, then you are irrational. Now, do you see how stupid? This is a silly way of thinking about food. Now, just take that, transpose it to morality. Same thing. I can have preferences like, I don't want people to murder people. I don't like it. I don't want them to do it. And I'll try to stop them if they do it. There's no contradiction there. There's no problems there. It has no implications for my practical behavior. I don't have to be a realist to be anti-murder. You just don't. You just don't. It's just, and also what I will say, if anything is obvious in philosophy, this is obvious. It's obvious. I don't have to think realism is true to oppose murder and to act the same way as a realist towards murder. And if they want to say it's a performative contradiction, they're welcome to have the argument. Honestly, I kind of just don't care. I'm going to do it anyway, even if they think it's a contradiction. I don't care if they think it's a contradiction. It's not, but like I can do it. So here's what I end up saying here. So let's go back to the quote. So in fact, let me get into the chat a little bit. Jonathan Becker is here. Holy crap, this is still going on. Yeah, I'm at 3 hours now, if that's what you're talking about. Unless you're talking about normative entanglement still being a thing. Realists still don't seem to have gotten the memo. They're still using normative entanglement. So if you're talking about that, yeah, they're still doing it. If you're talking about the stream, yeah, I'm still doing that. And I'm about to get into normative entanglement. Yeah, I mean, you could just imagine people saying, oh, you don't endorse the B theory of time, so you don't care if people are dying right now. You don't even care. Like it would be just so absurd to moralize people disagreeing with your abstract philosophical positions. And yet people do this for metaethics all the time. And that's what I call normative entanglement. It's where you conflate metaethical and normative considerations and give the false impression that the metaethicist that rejects moral realism is saddled with all these awful normative implications and practical implications. This is why Patrick in the previous remark says like you got to look at like the consequences of anti-realism. There are no consequences. There aren't any. It's just there aren't any. There's none. So yeah. Okay. So let's get into this. So to go back to Patrick's remark. So he says, again, it is often worthwhile to have the anti-realist go on the record about these things, since if they want to be consistent with their position, they will have to say what no human person should ever want to say concerning matters of, and then it lists some bad things. Now, notice that framing. They will have to say what no human person should ever want to say. We don't have to say anything, Patrick. We don't have to. We can say something contrary to what you think we're committed to saying. But also, there's a big difference between the technical meaning of what's said in a philosophical context and the pragmatic implications outside of that philosophical context. So when, for instance, an error theorist says it's not true that murder is wrong, it sounds like they're saying something absurd. But think about technically what they're committed to. What they're saying is, hey, take this type of category of sentence, a moral claim. These claims, just by whether analytically or whether as an empirical hypothesis about what ordinary people mean when they make these claims have a particular interpretation. The correct account of what this claim means is that there are these stance-independent moral facts, and the claim murder is wrong is referring to or attempting to refer to these stance-independent moral properties. But there are no such properties. And so technically the claim is false. And so technically a claim like murder is wrong is false. It's not true that murder is wrong. All that means is something like, hey, there's a particular category of sentence. That sentence has an implicit presupposition about metaphysics. That metaphysical presupposition is false, and so the sentence is false. That's all they're committed to. It's a very technical position that they're committed to. But when you make them say it in a public context, when they say, yeah, murder is wrong, the sentence murder is wrong is false, it sounds like they might be saying, I don't care if people murder, or I have no objections to murder, or it sounds like it carries these practical and normative implications, like the error theorist isn't justified in opposing murder. The error theorist wouldn't be as concerned about murder as the realist. It carries all these practical and supposed normative implications that don't follow from it, because the error theorist can say, yeah, because it unpack the sentence murder is wrong is false. What they mean is ordinary moral semantics involves the use of a particular type of claim, which carries an implicit presupposition about with certain metaphysical commitments. That metaphysical presupposition is false, and therefore the sentences that carry the implicit presupposition are themselves false. That is what the error theoretic position is. That's it. Okay, so in virtue of that, does it follow that the error theorist, it would be inconsistent with error theory for them if they saw someone trying to murder someone to say, hey, don't murder that person. I don't like murder. Stop that. Murder is unjust. They can't say it. That's inconsistent. What's the inconsistency? What is it? There is no inconsistency. It's not inconsistent. They can be they could vote for laws that prohibit murder. They could oppose people that try to commit murder. They could find murder repugnant and disgusting and awful. There is nothing. It's like their view about the metaphysical presuppositions implicit in certain kinds of sentences has nothing to do with their conduct, behavior, and everyday practical circumstances. Nothing to do with it. And yet, what philosophers do is they conflate the tactical semantic analysis of a sentence isolated from ordinary everyday contexts with its usage in an ordinary context. So take a philosopher at a conference in this exchange. So one person says to the error theorist, hey, error theorist, do you think the sentence murder is wrong is true? And the error theorist says, no, I don't think it's true. Of course, you know, as an error theorist, I think also sentences are false, right? And we'll take that in the metaphysical sense that it's meant, right? So, well, what do you mean by that? Oh, well, what I mean is that ordinary moral claims presuppose or attempt to describe stance-independent moral reality. There is no such stance-independent moral reality, and therefore such claims are systematically false. That's what I mean. Ah, okay. Now imagine you're walking down the street and you bump into someone, and they say, hey, watch where you're going. And you're like, oh, I'm really sorry. And they're like, yeah, you better be. You bump into me again. And then they threaten to kill you, right? And then you say, you can't murder me. That would be awful. That's wrong. And they say, murder's not wrong. Okay, what would you take that person to be saying? I wouldn't be taking them to be saying, the correct semantic analysis of ordinary moral claims is that they carry an implicit presupposition that they're stance-independent moral facts, and insofar as such claims implicitly presuppose that they're stance-independent moral facts, those claims are systematically false. Do you think that that's what that person's trying to convey to you? And then you go, oh, okay, thank you for sharing your meta-ethical position. That would be insane. It'd be ridiculous, right? They're not doing that. They're saying that they're implying something about what they might do in the future. They're implying they might kill you. They're threatening you. That's what they're doing. Now, that is an everyday use of the term murder is not wrong. When an error theorist says murder is not wrong, let me be very clear. It has absolutely fucking nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with that. And yet, people routinely act like these mean the same thing. And that if you're an error theorist, you're saying, yeah, maybe they'll kill you. Maybe you think it's okay to torture babies, or maybe you're at least indifferent. It's not that you think it's okay, it's that you don't think it's not okay. So, hey, if you don't think it's not okay, what do you think? If someone's torturing babies, you're going to go, well, it's not wrong, so I guess go ahead. They're implying, if you're an error theorist, you might be an evil piece of shit. That's what they're implying. That is false. It's false. That implication is false. And yet they do it anyway, and they do it constantly all the time. Why do they do this? And why do they not acknowledge that they're doing it? You tell me. Misleading, mischaracterizing, implying anti-realists are evil constantly. It is messed up. It's not just that it's bad philosophy, which it is. It's terrible philosophy. It's mixing up language. It's conflating things. It's all kinds of bad philosophy. It's also unethical. It's not right to do this, to imply that people that disagree with your metaphysical views might be evil, and evil in the worst kinds of ways. This is straight up just a totally messed up way of engaging with a rival position. And as an anti-realist, a very public anti-realist, I've been on the receiving end of these insinuations constantly. Constant insinuations that I'm evil. Professional philosophers at like top tier universities will outright say that anti-realists are evil. It's ridiculous. It's not acceptable. It's super unprofessional, and it needs to stop. And they keep doing it. So, in fact, I'll just mention someone that does this. Jason Brennan does this. There's a professor of philosophy that will just straight up say people like me are evil. It's absurd. Tried to interact with Jason Brennan, I just got blocked. And yet, if I say realism is ridiculous, people, Lance is super uncharitable. Lance is such a douchebag about this issue. Oh, okay. So implying that I'm okay with the worst things in human history, totally fine, even though that's super messed up and not true. But if I say your view is ridiculous, I'm super uncharitable. I don't even. Okay, so let me read what I say here. This is an appeal to, sorry, let me go over the remark again. Again, it's often worthwhile to have this is from Patrick. It's often worthwhile to have the anti-realist go on the record about these things, since if they want to be consistent with their position, they will have to say what no human person should ever want to say concerning. That's the quote continues. It describes some bad stuff. So here's what I say. This is an appeal to engaging in normative entanglement. Realism conflate meta-ethical claims with normative and character claims to give the misleading impression that one's meta-ethical position carries implications about their normative moral values and their character or behavior. For instance, if a moral anti-realist maintains that it is, quote, not objectively wrong to torture babies, this could be misinterpreted as an indication that the anti-realist does not think it's wrong to torture babies. This would be false. The anti-realist can, and probably does, think it is wrong to torture babies. They just don't think it's objectively wrong or stands independently wrong. Furthermore, if someone were to say in an everyday context, quote, I see nothing wrong with lying, end of quote, we might naturally think that this person is more likely to lie to us. Such a remark suggests an attitude towards lying that entails an increased willingness to lie, less likelihood of shame or guilt for engaging in lying, and so on. Yet when a moral anti-realist says that they don't think that the statement lying is wrong is true in an objective sense, they are making a highly technical claim about the metaphysical status of the truth makers of moral claims. In particular, the anti-realist only denies that there are stance-independent moral facts. A moral anti-realist is only committed to denying that moral claims are true insofar as, and only insofar as moral claims are understood to express claims about what is stance-independently moral or immoral. That is, if, quote, murder is wrong just means murder is stance-independently wrong, then the anti-realist agrees that murder is wrong is false. But this has absolutely no implications whatsoever for the anti-realist's attitude towards murder. It doesn't entail that they're any less opposed to murder than the realist does, that they think murder is any less bad, that they think they're any more likely to engage in murder, and so on. Patrick's suggestion that we get anti-realists on record saying things that make them look bad is likely a sincere attempt at highlighting what Patrick takes to be a damning and awful implication of anti-realism. But I believe Patrick is profoundly mistaken, and that, as sincere as his intentions may be, what is really going on when an anti-realist is made to look bad is the result of an audience's misunderstanding about what the anti-realist is committed to and what the anti-realist means by what they say. The anti-realist rejects a highly technical interpretation of certain sentences understood in a distinctive philosophical context. Those contexts involve isolating and focusing exclusively on the semantic content of the claims in question. They then reject the semantic presuppositions associated with these technical formulations of the claim, but critically, this does not entail a rejection of the pragmatic implications associated with the everyday use of those terms. To illustrate how this works, consider an ordinary person standing in line at a coffee shop. Hold on, I lost the line that I was in. I moved it for... Okay. Let me go back. To illustrate how this works, consider an ordinary person standing in line at a coffee shop. We overhear this person in a heated discussion with someone else, and they say, no, lying is wrong. In such context, this person may be expressing all of the following. 1, the normative moral position that lying is wrong. 2, the meta-ethical position that lying is stance independently wrong. 3, a negative attitude towards lying. And 4, they may be signaling their disinclination to lie, which gives us information about their likely behavior. In such circumstances, every instance of a person's moral claim contains every instance of a person's moral claim contains the formal semantic content, which may consist of 1 and 2, as well as pragmatic implications about their attitudes, 3, and their behavior, 4. However, when philosophers address moral claims, they are not addressing real-world moral claims. They are addressing moral claims outside these everyday contexts, and they seek specifically to set aside these pragmatic associations, that is, associations like 3 and 4, to focus exclusively on their semantics. They can discuss pragmatics, but they typically do, in practice, tend to focus on semantics. They then develop theories about the semantics of these isolated, decontextualized moral claims. Moral anti-realism predominantly concerns the semantics of these decontextualized moral claims. Such moral claims exist in a kind of conceptual cold storage, outside any real-world context of usage, and as such, they do not carry the pragmatic implications associated with their usage in any given context because they aren't being used in any particular context. That is, the sentence, lying is wrong, outside some context of usage can't carry the pragmatic implications implied by a speaker because there is no speaker and no context. The moral anti-realist means only to deny the distinct semantic content of these decontextualized, isolated toy sentences. An anti-realist denies that they are stance-independent moral facts. As such, insofar as a moral claim is taken to commit one to two, the anti-realist denies the claim. But this meta-ethical element of the claim is entangled with 1, 3, and 4. As such, to deny 2 can give the false impression that the anti-realist also denies 1, 3, and 4. The problem is that the meta-ethical presupposition is embedded inside the rest of these claims, such that to deny the meta-ethical claim gives the impression you're denying everything else too. For comparison, imagine if someone asked you, quote, "Do you think the earth is magically round?" If you say yes, they can scoff and say, "Wow, you believe in magic? That's absurd." If you say no, they could scoff and say, "Wow, you don't believe the earth is round? That's absurd." The question is a catch-22. The reason is that this is a kind of complex question where there are at least two claims in play. One, whether you think the earth is round, and two, whether you think it is round in a magical way. Since both claims are tangled up in a single yes-no question, there is no way to say yes to one but no to the other without a more nuanced response. But a more nuanced response may be viewed as a hedge or as a kind of sketchy and suspicious way of not directly engaging the question. Now move back over to metaethics and see how this works. A realist can ask an anti-realist, "Do you think it's objectively wrong to torture babies?" An anti-realist can't say yes without conceding to the realist. If they say no, the realist can imply the anti-realist isn't opposed to torturing babies and is an awful monster, even though this doesn't follow. Finally, if the anti-realist doesn't unhesitatingly respond with a clear yes or no, the realist can simply point to that fact and say, "Wow, see how the anti-realist can't give a clear response to a simple question?" And then gloat and depict the anti-realist as some kind of evil monster for hedging on whether baby torture is bad. When moral realists do this, they have effectively constructed a rhetorical Kafka trap. There is no possible way to respond that the realist couldn't leverage against you, not because realism has any genuine philosophical advantages over anti-realists, but because the realist can always lean on implications of one's response to misleadingly imply that there's something wrong with anti-realism, even when there isn't. What makes normative entanglement especially insidious is that it is shrouded in plausible deniability. Since the appeal of this move relies on insinuation and indirect implication, realists need not explicitly explain why the anti-realist response is so horrible, evil, or stupid. They can simply lean in to the mere fact that the anti-realist has publicly said something. That's it, just said something as obviously ludicrous and monstrous as, quote, "torturing babies isn't wrong." They can then point to the sentence and lead an audience to conflate the technical meaning that the anti-realist has in mind with the everyday meaning, replete with the pragmatic implications that the anti-realist is not actually committed to. That is normative entanglement. And that is the trick that realists routinely use to imply anti-realists are terrible, evil, awful, no good, horrible, very bad people. It is nonsensical. It is ridiculous. It is a way of smearing and mischaracterizing anti-realists, but in a way that is super insidious. It's very hard. I haven't, I've been describing this for what, 6, 8 months, a year now? I haven't had any realists go, "Oh shit, you're right. We are doing that. Let's stop doing it." They just keep doing it. Let's keep doing it. It's awful. And I haven't even seen anyone acknowledge that they keep implying we're evil, even though, at best, that would be something they would have to argue for. It's not something they're entitled to just insist and assert all the time or insist that we have some obligation to agree to. We don't. It's messed up. So, I get worked up about this stuff. Man, we're at 3.5 hours. This might be my longest one yet. I only see 5 people in the chat, so I think most people have headed out. But I don't know if I should keep going. Maybe I'll just do this another time when it's more active and engaging. I think I've worn everybody else out, but I'm ready to keep going. I'm animated today, so I'm not going to keep going just because most people seem to have headed out. So if anybody's around, let me know. Yeah. Okay. I think I'll wrap up there with the normative entanglement stuff. I had other stuff to cover, and I actually have the energy to keep going. I don't know why, but I'll save it for another time. Okay, so with that, I will say goodbye to everybody, and I will close out the stream. If you somehow incredibly made it to the end of this at 3.5 hours, then thanks for being here. I really appreciate all the people that for any amount of time you spent listening to me. Please like the video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, or at least consider doing so. Feel free to share this video with others. I don't think anybody's going to listen to 3.5 hours, but maybe they'll listen to parts of it. And maybe this will be good material for people to pull clips from and share parts of this if there was anything cool that I said here. Maybe there's stuff that I said that was really ridiculous and people will use that. But in any case, I appreciate everybody. Thanks so much for everybody being here. I know I was a bit more aggressive here, but I feel like it's a genuine expression of my attitude towards this stuff. And I really think that this normative entanglement stuff is a pretty serious deal. I get passionate about the stuff. I get enthusiastic about the stuff, but I have no ill will towards people like professional philosophers, non-philosophers, people that want to get in these discussions. I don't want people to be mean and nasty and imply that I'm evil. I don't like it. I think it's uncool, and I'm objecting to that. And if passionately objecting to someone implying I'm evil sounds rude or abrasive, I'm sorry. That's not my intention. But please stop implying I'm evil, please. I'm not evil. There's no baby torture happening here. I'm not okay with baby torture. I don't think I'm any more okay with it than moral realists. And like the concept of baby torture is wrong, and that is somehow monstrous. It's deeply frustrating. And I just can't we have a friendly exchange where we're not implying that the other person is evil? I don't think moral realists are evil, and please stop implying I am. So I know I was a bit passionate today, but okay. I hope it will be received well. I have a feeling some parts of this won't be, and I guess I'll roll with it. All right. Take care, everybody.